Chapter 1967. The dense forest was dark and deep. There were layers upon layers of mountains, and there was no trace of humans. There were only wild beasts running amok. It was a pure natural ecology that had not been destroyed. In the deepest part of the dense forest, there was a valley. The valley was very strange, and it was completely different from the dense forest. The dense forest was full of vitality, and it was lush and green. However, there was no vegetation growing in this valley. There was no sign of life. There was only a deathly silence. It was so silent that it made people's hearts palpitate. No matter how wild the wild beasts were, they did not dare to come close to the valley. Even if they came close, they immediately stopped and did not dare to enter the valley. Suddenly, the silent valley shook as if there was an earthquake. A layer of light spread from one side of the valley to the other. Under the light, the valley suddenly changed. Ancient and strange buildings, like inverted towers, appeared in the valley. It turned out that the originally empty and silent valley was set up with a profound and mysterious seal. At this moment, the seal was lifted and the true appearance of the valley was revealed. The inverted towers seemed to have left the ground and were suspended in the air. There was a total of 81 towers, like stars surrounding the moon. They surrounded the inverted tower in the middle like a king. Soon after, many figures flew out from the inverted towers. A few of the figures even gave off an extremely shocking aura fluctuation. They had all reached the level of a peerless expert. Most of the others gave off the aura fluctuation of a 9-star saint. It was extremely shocking. The 12 peerless experts all entered the center of the inverted pagoda. The interior was pitch black, and one could faintly see the outline of a throne. There seemed to be a figure sitting on it. That figure didn't look very strong, but it gave off a very tall and lofty feeling. It was like the sky, like the earth. Greetings, Lord Saint King. The 12 peerless experts were led by the strongest among them. 3 of them were in the middle and the other 8 were in the back. They were divided into 3 rows and knelt down on one knee to salute the figure on the throne. They were very sincere, as if they were believers. The vague figure on the throne only made a soft sound, but it contained an unimaginable power. It was as if the void was shaking. The 12 peerless experts were even more shocked. After a few hundred years, the Holy King's cultivation had become even more profound, reaching an unimaginable level. The Battle King is dead. Go and find out who killed him. The Holy King's voice was very calm, but there was also a sense of superiority, like a god overlooking the mortal world. Yes. Everybody was astonished when they heard that. They knew that the Holy King wasn't in power yet. Therefore, the Holy King shouldn't have come out of seclusion and wouldn't have summoned them. But now, he had suddenly come out of seclusion and summoned them. Something big must have happened. However, they never expected that the Lord Sacred Ruler would summon them to be related to the Battle King. The Battle King had fallen. They all knew of the 10 kings of the imperial dynasty and had seen them before. They knew how strong the Battle King was, but there was actually someone who could kill the Battle King, and there was actually someone who dared to do so. The Battle King himself was a peerless expert of the high stage of the 3rd refinement. His strength was even stronger than ordinary high stage of the 3rd refinement. There was no doubt that he was powerful. Moreover, he had the 5 heavenly generals and was one of the 10 kings of the imperial court. In terms of strength and authority, he was at the peak of the deep blue world. Someone actually dared to kill such an expert. Although they were shocked, they still had to find out who the murderer was. After the 12 Holy King's heavenly generals left, a smile flashed across the Holy King's face. Battle King, you were actually killed so easily. Really? Although he didn't finish his sentence, there was a hint of mockery in his voice. The 10 kings of the imperial dynasty could be said to be part of the imperial dynasty, but they could also be considered as competitors. The Holy King was a strange person. He didn't feel sad about Zhan Wang's death, but no matter what, Zhan Wang was one of the 10 kings of the imperial dynasty. He represented the imperial dynasty. Zhan Wang had been killed, so the Holy King had to take revenge. Every single one of them was like a sharp sword that pointed towards the sky. The forest of sword stones was silent, and there was no sign of life. It was filled with an aura of extinction. When the birds flew past, their bodies trembled, and they fell down. No one knew when they had died, but when they fell, they were crushed by the formless aura. Suddenly, the sword-like rocks emitted an extremely shocking sword intent. The sword intent soared into the sky, and the wind and clouds moved. The sharpness seemed to be able to pierce through the sky. The aura of extinction filled the air, and it rippled endlessly. A buzzing sound filled the sky, as if 10,000 swords were humming at the same time. Then, from below the rocks, beams of light soared into the sky. They were incomparably sharp, and the sword light was earth-shattering. The sword light dissipated, turning into silhouettes that stood in the air. There weren't many of them, only 112. One of them was in the center, as if he was the king of the group. His face was ordinary, but his eyes were ice-cold, and there was a trace of the aura of extinction. It was as if everything in his line of sight would be destroyed. This person looked like a middle-aged man, but his hair wasn't black, nor was it white. It was gray. It was a very peculiar gray that seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. The robe he wore was gray as well. Around him, there were 11 people who emitted auras that had reached the level of peerless expert. Moreover, each one of them was as sharp as a sword. The other 100 people were all at the pinnacle of the 9-star saint realm. Their auras were extremely shocking. If Chu Mu could sense it, he would be able to tell that these 100 people in gray were at least bright moon sword saints, and some of them were at the bright sun sword saint realm. The Battle King is dead. Go and investigate who killed him, the middle-aged man in gray said. His voice was hoarse, like the sound of metal clashing. Yes. When the others heard this, they were all shocked. They didn't expect this to happen. The Battle King was killed, but they had to obey the orders of the sword of Gojoseon. This person's body was like a sword. He was the second-ranked sword of Gojoseon of the 10 kings of the imperial court. When the Holy King appeared, the sword of Gojoseon also appeared. The third-ranked King Wu, who was in the Floating Mountain sect, also appeared. He sent out his subordinates to investigate the Battle King's death. The Holy King came out, the sword of Gojoseon came out, and the King Wu came out. Naturally, the other kings also came out. The Evil King was ranked 4th. He looked handsome and evil. He was surrounded by 2 extremely enchanting beauties. He hugged them in his left and right arms. He was enjoying himself very much. Go and find out who killed the Battle King, the Evil King smiled. The corners of the Evil King's mouth curled up into an evil smile. Battle King, you really are a piece of trash. You were actually killed by someone. But that's good too. This is a good opportunity. Whoever kills the murderer first will be able to obtain the greatest benefit. So it turned out that this was the reason why the 9 monarchs were working so hard. Whoever could find the war monarch's murderer and kill him would obtain the greatest benefits. This was a hidden rule. The Evil King also came out. The 5th ranked was the Dragon King. He wore a dragon robe and had a domineering aura. The 6th ranked was the Blood King. In terms of looks, he was comparable to the Evil King. However, the Evil King was handsome in an evil way, while the Blood King was handsome in a demonic way. There was a difference between the two. The Blood King wore a blood-red robe. The patterns on his robe were like a surging blood river. It was very eerie. The Blood King naturally had a group of peerless experts under him. There was also a group of 9-star saints. They were all very strong and were very loyal to the Blood King. The 7th ranked of the 10 kings was the Battle King. Now that the Battle King was dead, his subordinates were all dead as well. He was no longer part of the 10 kings. The 8th person was the Ghost King. He had a bony face and pitch-black eyes that seemed bottomless. He was astonishingly strange and cold. He was dressed in a pitch-black robe that had strange and ferocious ghost patterns on it. They were vivid and lifelike, as if they could rush out at any time to tear a person's flesh and blood. The Ghost King's subordinates were like him. They looked very eerie. When they moved, it was like 100 ghosts were marching in the night. The 9th king was the Azure King, also known as the Evergreen King. It was said that he was the youngest of the 10 kings. However, he was also very talented. His comprehension was shocking, and he was vaguely known as the number 1 of the 10 kings. However, his cultivation time was much shorter than the others. Even so, he became the 9th king and improved rapidly. It was very shocking. The 10th king was originally the 9th king. He was later surpassed by the Azure King and became the Vajra King. The Vajra King's body was like an iron tower. He walked the path of body cultivation and achieved a spiritual body. His combat strength was shocking. The reason why he was ranked 10th wasn't because he wasn't strong enough. It was because he specialized in defense and was hard to kill. However, in terms of offense, he was just barely passable. In a battle between experts, having a strong defense was one thing, but if one's offense wasn't strong enough, it would be difficult to kill the enemy. Because of the death of the Battle King, the other 9 kings all came out of seclusion. They had at least a few decades of seclusion cultivation. Their strength had increased to a certain extent. For the top 3 kings, they had been in seclusion for hundreds of years. Their strength had increased even more. One had to know that the 10 kings of the imperial dynasty were all extremely talented. Moreover, they had killed their way through countless competitions. With enough resources and outstanding talent, there was no reason why they couldn't improve. For example, the Battle King. If he didn't die, he could have improved to the peak of the 3rd refinement within a few decades of seclusion cultivation. It wouldn't have been a problem for him to reach the peak of the 3rd refinement. He even had the chance to reach the peak of the 3rd refinement. Unfortunately, he died. With the 9 kings all out, the sky of the deep blue world was about to change. Chapter 1968. With the appearance of the 9 kings, the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the deep blue world underwent some changes. These changes were extremely subtle and difficult to detect. Only those with a high enough cultivation would be able to detect them. With the appearance of so many experts, the world is about to change. This world has been silent for too long. It's about time for a storm. In the depths of the cave, Chu Mu sat with his legs crossed. There were large amounts of demon fiend crystals around him. Circulating the intermediate demon fiend body cultivation method, a powerful suction force burst forth from his body. Immediately, the demon fiend chi within the demon fiend crystals around him was absorbed. The energy within the demon fiend crystals was the same as the aura of the demon fiend, but it was even purer than the aura of the demon fiend itself. Of course, it was also extremely precious and difficult to obtain. Chu Mu's group of 6 had spent 2 years in the Great Demon Burial Abyss, but they had only obtained several hundred crystals. It wasn't a lot. In addition, there were over 100 demon fiend crystals in the Warlord's space ring, which could be considered an unexpected gain. Strands of energy from the demon fiend crystals were constantly absorbed by Chu Mu and entered his body. As they flowed, they tempered Chu Mu's body. At the same time, they were also accumulating the energy of the demon fiend body in preparation for breaking through to the intermediate demon fiend body. The strength of the low demon fiend body made Chu Mu yearn for the power of the intermediate demon fiend body even more. Strange black patterns took root on Chu Mu's body and gradually spread out. These pitch-black patterns contained an astonishing amount of energy. They were the foundation of the demon fiend body's power. The energy of the first demon fiend crystal was completely consumed, leaving behind only a tiny bit of energy. Soon after, the energy of the second demon fiend crystal was also completely absorbed. When the energy of the 100th demon fiend crystal was completely absorbed, Chu Mu felt his body tremble uncontrollably. The strange black patterns on his body seemed to come alive as they rapidly wriggled faster and faster. Waves of incomparably powerful energy constantly burst forth from the pitch-black patterns, attacking his body. His muscles, tendons, bones, blood, internal organs, limbs, and bones were all being strengthened over and over again, becoming more and more tyrannical. The powerful force was like a tide, wave after wave, continuously attacking every part of Chu Mu's body. This process lasted for a full hour before it stopped. Chu Mu's body trembled as the final surge of energy spread throughout his body, causing the trembling to stop. Mid-level demonic spirit body, powerful strength. Chu Mu quickly got up and clenched his fist. He could feel the space between his palms shattering. He could crush a mountain with just one hand. The feeling of having such a powerful body was completely different from the strength of sword origin. His body, on top of his original foundation, was slightly stronger. However, Chu Mu's body originally looked rather skinny. Now that he had cultivated the low-rank Devil Soul body and middle-rank Devil Soul body, after 2 rounds of strengthening, he was 3 times stronger than before. He seemed to have even more temperament and charm. Chu Mu didn't care about the slight changes in his appearance. This was because he didn't rely on his looks to make a living. Being good-looking wouldn't bring about an increase in strength. The most important thing was the increase in strength. The difference between the low-level demon spirit body and the mid-level demon spirit body was like the difference between a first refinement and a second refinement expert. Under normal circumstances, a second refinement expert could easily kill a first refinement expert. The difference in strength was definitely more than 100 times. With a 100-fold increase in strength, Chu Mu's strength directly reached the 4th refinement from the half-step to the 4th refinement. However, he wasn't clear as to what level he could reach. This was because the higher the level, the greater the difference. For example, the difference in strength between the low-level 4th refinement and the mid-level 4th refinement was definitely much greater than the difference between the low-level 3rd refinement and the mid-level 3rd refinement. No matter what, Chu Mu's strength had indeed increased significantly after cultivating the mid-level demon spirit body. However, this still isn't enough. Next, I need to comprehend the invincible finger. Chu Mu muttered to himself. He put away the remaining demon fiend crystals and walked out of his seclusion room. Before comprehending the invincible finger, he needed to give the remaining demon fiend crystals to the others so that they could cultivate the mid-level demon spirit body. Brothers, the amount of demon fiend crystals needed to cultivate the mid-level demon spirit body is about 100. I've already used 100, so there are still 500 left. It should be enough for all of you to cultivate the mid-level demon spirit body, said Chu Mu as he took out all the demon fiend crystals. Fortunately, he had obtained more than 100 demon fiend crystals from the warlord's spatial ring. Otherwise, at least 1 or 2 of the 6 of them wouldn't be able to cultivate the mid-level demon spirit body. After taking out the demon fiend crystals, Chu Mu went into seclusion once more to comprehend the invincible finger. He mainly cultivated the way of the sword and didn't intend to cultivate the invincible finger. Instead, he wanted to comprehend the essence of the invincible finger and integrate it into the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword style. The heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword style was born out of the 3 saints' secret sword. The 3 swords of heaven, earth, and man were extremely powerful. It was the most powerful sword style that Chu Mu had mastered so far. The invincible finger, the earthly calamity sword style, the earthly calamity sword style, the earthly calamity sword style, the earthly calamity sword style. If he could absorb the essence of the invincible finger and integrate it into the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword style, he would be able to increase the power of the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword style. Chu Mu's comprehension ability was astonishing and unparalleled. It could be said that his comprehension ability was his greatest ability. The invincible finger was one of the undying Saint Emperor's 10 ultimate techniques. It was powerful and unfathomable. Naturally, it was extremely mysterious. For example, Kong Lu and Lei Ba, their comprehension abilities could be considered to be above average or even above average. However, after a period of comprehension, they could only comprehend a little bit of the invincible finger. However, Chu Mu only used 1 day to comprehend the surface of the invincible finger. What a terrifying finger technique! After comprehending it, Chu Mu exclaimed. He didn't know who created the invincible finger, but it was indeed an amazing finger technique. The increase in strength of this finger technique wasn't obvious, but its true power lay in the 3 different types of power. Once the invincible finger was fully mastered, the earth-shattering finger would be able to transform its power into the earth-shattering finger, giving it the ability to shatter the earth. The second and third finger were the same as the first finger. However, the second finger was stronger than the first finger, and the third finger was stronger than the combination of the first and second finger. The second finger was naturally harder to cultivate than the first finger. As for the third finger, it was even harder to cultivate than the second finger. Chu Mu didn't cultivate it, nor did he have the energy to do so. He only needed the essence of the invincible finger. Compared to cultivating it, the difficulty was much lower, but it was still difficult. The destruction of the imperial court's war monarch king tribe was soon known by others. Furthermore, it was verified that it belonged to the imperial court. Of course, they didn't know the details of the imperial court and thought that it was the headquarters of the imperial court. The destruction of the headquarters was a huge matter. Like a storm, it swept across the deep blue world. Figures came from all directions and arrived at the imperial court's divine mountain. When they saw the ruins of the palace and the corpses on the ground, they were all dumbfounded. Of course, their purpose here wasn't just to witness the destruction with their own eyes. They were also here to search for the so-called treasures. The imperial court's headquarters was incomparably ancient and mysterious. There must be a lot of treasures hidden within. As long as they could obtain a portion of the treasures, their strength might increase, and they would become even stronger. Unfortunately, they didn't know that this wasn't the imperial court's headquarters. It was just one of the 10 great king tribes. There weren't any treasures left in this place. A portion of them were in the war monarch's spatial ring, while the other portion had been taken away by Zhishur. Here, there were only corpses and ruins. The people who arrived first had already turned the place upside down. Not only did they not find anything, but they were also stopped by the people who arrived later. They had to hand over the treasures they obtained. At the very least, they had to divide the treasures equally. Otherwise, they would attack. Therefore, many battles had already happened in this place, and there were many more dead souls. At that moment, 12 figures flew over from the distance with astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, they streaked across the sky, leaving behind 12 straight tracks. They appeared above the ruins of the war monarch king tribe. They looked down and glanced at all the figures below. The group of people who wanted to fight for the so-called treasures couldn't help but shiver. A chilling intent emerged from the depths of their bodies. "Kill them." The leader of the 12 figures coldly said 2 words. Immediately after, the 11 people behind him all exploded with terrifying killing intent as they made their move. Fingers, palms, fists, all sorts of attacks descended. The people below didn't even have time to react. They could only reveal terrified expressions. They couldn't dodge the attacks and were immediately hit. The 12 strong cultivators were the 12 heavenly generals under the Holy King's command. Each and every one of them was extremely strong. The leader had reached the peak of the 3rd refinement, completely surpassing the war monarch. There were 3 others who were at the peak of the 3rd refinement. The other 8 were at the middle of the 3rd refinement. They were extremely terrifying. When they attacked, the peerless cultivators below had no chance of resisting. With a single attack, the group of people below were all killed. Not even their bones were left. The war monarch is still a piece of trash. The first heavenly general of the Holy King humphed coldly after sweeping the corpses below. Even though the war monarch was one of the 10 kings of the imperial dynasty and had a high status, he couldn't control the first heavenly general of the Holy King tribe because he was the first heavenly general of the Holy King tribe. In fact, his status wasn't any lower than the war monarch's. After all, the difference between the war monarch and the Holy King tribe was too obvious. Even when the war monarch was still alive, the first heavenly general of the Holy King tribe didn't fear the war monarch at all. Moreover, the war monarch was already a dead man. At that moment, more figures arrived from all directions. They were the heavenly generals of the other kings of the imperial dynasty. Chapter 1969. Divine Wilderness Sword Energy, Intermediate Demon Spirit Body, True Intent, Dual Sword Technique. Chu Mu silently calculated his current strength. Without using sword intent, my strength should be able to reach the beginner 3rd refinement. Originally, the beginner demon spirit body combined with other strengths could raise Chu Mu's strength to the peak of 2nd refinement. The intermediate demon spirit body was 100 times stronger than the beginner demon spirit body. Naturally, this increase would be very obvious. The so-called 100-fold difference between each peerless expert was just the most basic difference in strength. Other than the most basic strength, there were other kinds of strength. When combined, the difference in strength was not as simple as a 100-fold difference, but a 1,000-fold difference or even more. If I use the Eternal Sword Intent, I can at least reach the peak of 3rd refinement. If I use the Annihilation Sword Intent, I can threaten or even kill someone at the peak of 3rd refinement. A 1,000 times increase was huge, but Chu Mu's basic strength was still not high enough. If his basic strength could reach the true 3rd refinement, he could definitely reach the 4th refinement. However, the truth was that his basic strength, sword energy, was only at the exceptional 1st refinement level, while his physique was at the exceptional 2nd refinement level. Because the low-grade demon spirit body had been upgraded to the middle-grade demon spirit body, the original 10,000 truth prison breaching technique did not have much of an effect on increasing his strength. He dispersed the 10,000 truth prison breaching technique and reformed it. The new 10,000 truth prison breaching technique was the combination of the divine wilderness sword essence and the middle-grade demon spirit body. Its power was even stronger. Time passed, and everyone continued to cultivate. Chu Mu also continued to comprehend the invincible finger. Entry, small success, and deeper. As long as he could comprehend the Deshang, he would be able to integrate the essence of the invincible finger into the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword technique. Outside the cave, there were layers of seals. When they were activated, Chu Mu and the rest could feel it. "Brothers, don't worry and cultivate. I'll go out and take a look," Chu Mu said. The deeper one went into the comprehension of the invincible finger, the more difficult it was. It was not something that could be comprehended simply through seclusion. Moreover, everyone had not cultivated the intermediate demon spirit body. They needed to speed up their cultivation and increase their strength as soon as possible. In a flash, Chu Mu quickly left the cave and appeared in the outside world. As expected, it's here. Chu Mu, you have nowhere to run this time. There were figures everywhere. Chu Mu swept his eyes over them. They were all peerless powerhouses of the celestial race, the so-called celestial race's divine guard. The divine guard had been chasing Chu Mu and the others this entire time. However, in the past 2 or 3 years, they had never been able to catch up to Chu Mu and the others. This time, they had finally found them. How could they let them go? They immediately gathered a large number of people and formed an encirclement, sealing off the surroundings. This was a battle formation, a very huge one. It had been set up by several hundred God-forbidden guards. It directly sealed up the space within 100,000 meters. Even 3rd refinement experts who were skilled in the way of space were unable to break through the seal. Even 4th refinement experts were unable to use techniques like teleportation to leave. In order to deal with Chu Mu, the celestial race's divine guard had also paid a heavy price. Several hundred peerless powerhouses. Although this was not all of the peerless powerhouses of the celestial race, it was already the majority. They had all moved out and even set up a heaven-sealing earth-locking formation. This was truly shocking. Chu-Mu did not answer. He swept his gaze over and clearly saw the strength of these 200 God-forbidden guards. There were a total of 256 God-forbidden guards. Among them, 26 were Third Refinement God-forbidden guards. There were 80 Second Refinement God-forbidden guards. The remaining 150 were all First Refinement God-forbidden guards. Seeing so many peerless powerhouses, Chu-Mu could not help but be shocked by the foundation of the celestial race. Moreover, he also knew that these were definitely not all of the peerless powerhouses of the celestial race. They could only be considered a part of them. Even if they were the majority in terms of numbers, they were definitely not the majority in terms of strength. The saying that the celestial race had sent out all of their God-forbidden guards to kill him was just a saying. It was not true. This was because Chu-Mu felt that there were definitely Fourth Refinement experts among the celestial race. There might even be Fifth Refinement Saint Sovereigns. Those were the truly terrifying enemies. If it was in the past, Chu-Mu would definitely have a headache when surrounded by so many God-forbidden guards. This was because among the 26 Third Refinement God-forbidden guards, the strongest was at the peak of the Third Refinement. There were even a few at the peak of the Third Refinement. The rest were at the high, middle, and early stages of the Third Refinement. When they joined forces, their strength was extremely tyrannical. Even a half-step Fourth Refinement was no match for them. But now, Chu-Mu had cultivated the mid-demon spirit body. His strength had reached a whole new height. Facing hundreds of God-forbidden guards, he did not feel the slightest bit of fear. On the contrary, excitement surged from the depths of his heart. Without wasting any words, Chu-Mu clenched his hands. The Eternal Spirit Sword and Annihilation Spirit Sword appeared together. His aura instantly soared. He broke through. Sealed the heavens and earth. The expression of the leader of the God-forbidden guards changed. He immediately shouted. The 256 God-forbidden guards immediately moved. The Grand Formation also revolved. The Seal the Heavens and Earth Lock Grand Formation was a battle formation of the God race. It would not directly increase their strength, but it would seal the space. Everything in the sky and on the ground would be sealed. Within the Grand Formation, Chu-Mu immediately felt that the space around him had become even more stable. In an instant, it had become at least 1,000 times more stable. Moreover, from all directions, a powerful force was constantly pressing down on Chu-Mu, forming a powerful pressure that made Chu-Mu feel as if he was being bound and imprisoned. Although such a grand formation could not directly increase their strength, it could create enough pressure for the other side. Under this pressure, every move of the other side would have to consume more energy. At least 10 times more energy to ensure that they could move freely. They believed that no matter how powerful Chu-Mu was, he would not be able to escape from their Seal the Heavens and Earth Lock Grand Formation. Moreover, they believed that he would be killed within this Grand Formation. This was confidence in their own strength, and also confidence in their clan's Seal the Heavens and Earth Lock Grand Formation. However, they did not know to what extent Chu-Mu's strength would reach if he unleashed his full strength. Otherwise, they would not be so confident. The powerful pressure was everywhere and pervasive. It came from all directions and crazily suppressed him. Chu-Mu felt as if he was imprisoned inside a divine mountain. He was being squeezed by a terrifying force. It was difficult for him to even move. Is it just this kind of pressure? With a chuckle, Chu-Mu's eyes became sharper. An astonishing aura fluctuation instantly exploded. On his body, blood-red flames burned. Blood prison burning the heavens. Blood prison burning the heavens was a rather mysterious secret technique. No one knew where Sun Jin had obtained it. This secret technique burned one's blood essence in exchange for powerful strength. When Chu Mu's saint body was still at the peak of 9th level, burning 30% of his blood essence in exchange for an 8-fold increase in strength. When he reached the low-level demon spirit body, burning 30% of his blood essence in exchange for a 10-fold increase in strength. Now, 30% of his blood essence in exchange for a 12-fold increase in strength, which was even more powerful. Under the 12-fold increase in strength, Chu Mu's aura strengthened once again. Sword domain change. Eternal sword intent. His aura stabilized at the half-step 4th refinement level. This caused the expressions of the divine guards to change drastically. They were all incomparably shocked. Chu Mu's strength had completely exceeded their expectations. This kind of growth speed was simply too fast. It made their hearts turn cold. Their killing intent burned even more fiercely. They were very clear that if they allowed such a monstrous human to continue growing, it would definitely bring disaster to the divine race. Under the heaven-sealing earth-locking great array, the 256 divine guards attacked together. Move after move of heaven techniques were displayed. 10,000 streams were buried, heaven and earth collapsed, and countless flowing lights overflowed. The 256 divine guards attacked. Moreover, they attacked with their full strength. Their might was astonishing. Even though they did not condense their power into one, it was still very terrifying. Although Chu Mu was not weak, he was not willing to face them head-on. That would consume too much of his strength. His figure flickered, and the heart sword was like a single strike. The trajectory of each attack appeared in his perception. Sword chi afterimages were displayed, and there were layers upon layers of afterimages. It was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. The afterimages were shattered by the heaven technique. Chu Mu's true body shuttled through the numerous heaven technique. He was like a fish in water, swimming against the current. He held his sword with both hands, but his killing intent was restrained, not releasing the slightest bit. Under this great array, Chu Mu's every movement would consume more energy. This was because only by doing so could he move normally. A portion of his strength came from using a secret technique. It was destined that he would not be able to maintain it for too long. Otherwise, once 30% of his blood essence was exhausted, if he used blood hell burning the heavens again before he recovered, it would cause damage to his foundation. He had to end the battle quickly. Under the heaven-sealing earth-locking great array, although it was unable to directly increase the strength of the divine guards, it greatly increased their perception. As long as they were in the array, no fluctuations could escape their perception. Chu Mu's dodging and charging were also under their perception. It was precisely because they sensed it that they were even more shocked. Dragon snaring lasso. The peak 3rd refinement divine guard's fingers quickly formed hand seals. They turned into rays of light that shot out. Although Chu Mu sensed it, he was unable to dodge. He was directly hit. He did not receive any damage, but a rope of light appeared on his body, tightly binding him. He could not move. The dragon snaring lasso was an extremely famous technique among the divine guards. It was created to trap flood dragons, and it had a sure hit effect. As for whether it could trap a true dragon, it had never been tested before. However, its power was extremely shocking. When used on a human, it was even more tyrannical. Kill! Piercing the heavens. Chaotic slash. This was a rare opportunity. The 256 divine guards attacked once more, wanting to kill him in one blow. Chapter 1970. More than 200 terrifying heavenly techniques filled with destructive power bombarded him from all directions. 150 of them were divine guards' heavenly arts. Even if Chu Mu did not dodge or defend, just the blood shark robe and blood shark armor were enough to withstand them. Not to mention, he also had the powerful mid-grade devil innate physique. The heavenly techniques of the 82nd refinement divine forbidden guards were even more powerful. However, if he was hit with his 3 layers of defense, Chu Mu could ensure his safety. What posed a threat were the heavenly techniques of the 26th Third Refinement Divine Forbidden Guard. They were even more powerful. With 3 layers of defense, Chu Mu didn't dare take them head-on. Without the slightest hesitation, Chu Mu directly used a drop of 10,000 truths prison-breaking strength. In his middle dantian region, there were only 3 drops of the strength of 10,000 hell-breaching scriptures. Chu Mu wouldn't use it unless he had no other choice. But now, he could only use 1 drop. Immense power flowed through Chu Mu. The strength of a half-step to 4th refinement increased once more, almost reaching the level of 4th refinement. Chu Mu's muscles bulged and contracted. His explosive power was boosted by the force of hell-breaching 10,000 truths, making the dragon-snaring lasso even more frightening. Boom! The dragon-snaring lasso on his body snapped under the sudden burst of power from Chu Mu. The power of the dragon-snaring lasso, which was brought to bear by someone at the limit of the 3rd refinement, was still limited. The fact that it was able to bind someone who was half a step into the 4th refinement was already shocking enough. Sword of the 6 Paths. 6 pitch-black vortexes appeared around Zhang Xian, absorbing and shattering the incoming heavenly arts. Although the 6 Dao sword style was powerful, it was unable to absorb all of the heavenly arts. What Chu Mu needed was time. Sword Chi Shadow. Chu Mu's true body disappeared and instantly appeared before a celestial race god forbidding guard. This was a 2nd refinement god forbidding guard. Even with the strengthened senses of the formation, they could sense Chu Mu's movements. However, he was just too fast, completely surpassing the limits of what a 2nd refined guard could react to. By the time he sensed it, Chu Mu's 2 swords had already slashed through his body. He did not even feel any pain before his consciousness fell into darkness. Chu Mu's swords were just too fast. The moment Chu Mu launched his attack, it was like a ferocious tiger pouncing into a flock of weak sheep. The 2 swords were tiger claws and tiger fangs. Under Chu Mu's 2 swords, the divine forbidden guards were no different from weak sheep. The heaven-sealing earth-locking formation was indeed miraculous, but it did not directly increase their strength. The absolute difference in strength was enough to be fatal. The sword light was like a bolt of lightning, tearing through the sky. It was invincible and unstoppable. There was not a single divine forbidden guard that could withstand Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu, who had barely reached the early 4th refinement, was just too fast. They could sense him, but they could not dodge. This was because their senses had been forcibly increased by the celestial race god forbidding guard. Their reactions were still at their original level. If their reactions could not keep up, they could sense it. This would only increase their fear. This was because they could sense Chu Mu's approach. They could feel the cold killing intent from Chu Mu's 2 swords. They could feel their lives slipping away. This fear was like a virus, corroding their minds. How could this be? The 3rd refinement god forbidding guards had stronger senses and faster reactions. They would not be killed so easily by Chu Mu. This was also related to the fact that Chu Mu's target was not them. However, they could clearly sense everything that was happening. They could only watch as their own people were killed one after another, unable to do anything. This feeling of helplessness made them go crazy. The fear in their eyes before they died gnawed at their minds. For the first time, they felt regret. They had originally thought that with their strength and the celestial race god forbidding guard, they would be able to trap Chu Mu and prevent him from escaping. They had never imagined that the reality would be completely different from what they had planned. Chu Mu's strength was just too terrifying. It was so terrifying that it made them feel terrified. Furthermore, because of the celestial race god forbidding guard, they were unable to escape. For a formation as shocking as the celestial race god forbidding guard, it was naturally impossible for it to be perfect in every aspect. It could seal off the space within a certain range and create enormous pressure on the target, causing the target's energy consumption to increase tenfold. At the same time, within the celestial race god forbidding guard, The person who had set up the celestial race god forbidding guard couldn't easily leave. It wasn't that they couldn't leave, but that they couldn't easily leave. Otherwise, the celestial race god forbidding guard would instantly collapse. When the celestial race god forbidding guard collapsed, the energy would flow backwards and attack them. Perhaps they wouldn't die or even be injured, but they would be affected. Coincidentally, the effect of the collapse of the celestial race god forbidding guard was that their bodies would be instantly suppressed, making them unable to move. Moreover, Chu-Mu was suppressed by the celestial race god forbidding guard. Without the suppression of the celestial race god forbidding guard, perhaps he would be even faster. Before long, over 100 guards had died to Chu-Mu's sword. Stop! Stop immediately! If this continued, they would probably all die here. The leader of the celestial race god forbidding guard hurriedly roared. However, Chu-Mu didn't seem to hear him. He continued to move and attack. With each attack, he would take the life of a celestial race god forbidding guard. Naturally, the 26 celestial race god forbidding guards couldn't just watch as Chu-Mu killed their compatriot. They all attacked with their full strength, using their secret techniques to increase their strength. When the celestial race god forbidding guard executed his secret technique, he reached the half-step fourth refinement. He was already close to Chu-Mu's strength. His attacks were so strong that even Chu-Mu didn't dare to ignore them. He was immediately blocked. The other 25 celestial race god forbidding guards reacted quickly, forming an even smaller circle around Chu-Mu. Since you killed my people, you will definitely die. The celestial race god forbidding guard gnashed his teeth hatefully. He wished he could skin Chu-Mu alive. The people who wanted to kill me are already dead. You will die soon as well. Chu-Mu did not fear the other party's threat. He smiled coldly. Up until now, he had experienced countless battles, big and small. He had walked on the edge of life and death countless times. How could he be frightened by the other party's words? No matter how fierce his expression was, it was useless. With a glance, Chu-Mu saw the expressions of the 26 celestial race god forbidding guards. Their auras were all under his control. Every one of them used their secret techniques, and their strength had clearly increased. However, this increase in strength was not enough to make Chu-Mu feel threatened. Without any hesitation, the eternal spirit sword trembled. Sword chi surged, and lotus flowers condensed. They instantly shot out, shooting out an endless stream of sword chi. Wave after wave, it was endless. The annihilation spirit sword slashed out. There was no beginning or end. A grayish-black sword light of unknown length tore through the air. Endless life sword style. Solitary life sword style. The expressions of the 26 celestial race god forbidding guards changed drastically. They hurriedly used their heavenly techniques to block. However, this was just a prelude. The corner of Chu-Mu's mouth flashed with a smile. That smile contained a chilling killing intent. Crossing his swords, Chu-Mu assumed a very peculiar posture. It was as if he was using his swords as arms to hug something. The eternal sword intent, the annihilation sword intent, the life sword spirit's power, the death sword spirit's power. The life sword spirit's power fused with the eternal sword intent, and the death sword spirit's power fused with the annihilation sword intent. Instantly, half of Chu-Mu's body was filled with eternal life, while the other half was filled with annihilation. The power of life and death, eternal and annihilation. These two opposing forces coiled around his body and collided. They coexisted and fused together in a strange way. The 26 celestial race god forbidding guards felt an inexplicable sense of fear. That fear directly spread out from their souls, and their bodies involuntarily trembled. You're very lucky. You'll personally experience my newly created sword style. Chu-Mu's voice rang out from the four opposing energies. It carried with it a strange fluctuation that seemed to pass through space and time. It entered their ears, causing their minds to become dazed. Samsara of life and death. As his voice rang out, Chu Mu's two swords also attacked. It was as if all of his power had poured out in an instant. Through the two swords in his hands, the four energies collided and fused together, forming a perfect cycle. Eternal life and annihilation, life and death. The cycle alternated. A samsara was the samsara of life and death. A year was a year of life and death, a blade of grass was a year of life and death. The wheel of sword chi formed by the two swords spun wildly and slashed wildly. Under the wheel of sword chi, half of the void was filled with eternal life, while the other half was filled with annihilation death. Everyone seemed to be able to see the grass and trees frantically grow in an instant before withering away in the blink of an eye. The raging waves of the rivers and lakes, the thousands of miles of dry land, all sorts of strange phenomena, all showed the alternation of life and death. Life and death were the most basic laws of every world. It was a process that every living creature had to go through. No one could escape it, no matter how strong an expert was, no matter how profound their realm was, they could only live a little longer. Only gods could truly live forever. However, gods weren't omnipotent. They could also fall. All of this was in the samsara of life and death. Chu Mu's new sword style was named Samsara of Life and Death. Perhaps this sword style wasn't strong enough right now and didn't have the power to truly reincarnate life and death. However, Chu Mu believed that one day it would definitely be able to do so. Any resistance against this terrifying power was futile. Even an early fourth refinement expert wouldn't dare to take this sword head-on, let alone a group of third refinement divine guard. As expected, under the samsara of life and death, the 26 divine guards were all killed and turned into ashes. Even their souls couldn't escape and fell into the cycle of reincarnation forever. With the death of the 26th third refinement divine guard, the heaven-sealing earth-locking formation only existed in name and was on the verge of collapse. The remaining divine guard couldn't escape either. They all died under Chu Mu's two swords. It didn't take long for all 256 divine guards to die. The only person who had killed them was Chu Mu. Chapter 1971. Over 200 divine guard corpses fell from the mountain range. They were strewn all over the place. It was a shocking sight. With a wave of his hand, Chu Mu collected the spatial rings of the 256 divine guard corpses. No matter what, there would still be some resources and treasures. Even if they were useless to him, they would still be of great use to the true sword sect. At this moment, an unforeseen event occurred. Every divine guard's corpse lit up with a silver light that rapidly condensed into a dot. A total of 256 dots rose up from the corpses and gathered in the air. It was as if there was an invisible brush in the air that embellished those dots of silver light, quickly forming an outline. The brush moved like a dragon or a snake. In the blink of an eye, an incomparably complex and profound ancient character condensed. It gave off the aura of the world, as if it had been born from the heavenly Daos. When Chu Mu saw these ancient silver characters, he had a bad feeling. Without any hesitation, he erupted with speed and immediately left for his dwelling. At the same time, he slashed out with his sword. A resplendent cross sword light tore through the air in an attempt to shatter the ancient silver characters. The ancient silver characters seemed to have a mind of their own. They chased after Chu Mu. They ignored the cross sword light and directly pierced through it. In the blink of an eye, they closed in on Chu Mu. Unable to dodge, they sank into the space between Chu Mu's eyebrows. This change caused Chu Mu's expression to change. He hastily gathered his spiritual strength and other powers to examine the space between his eyebrows. A flickering ancient character was embedded in the space between his eyebrows. It gave off a boundless aura. Chu Mu didn't know what this character was, nor did he know what it meant. However, no matter how he used the Eternal Sword intent or the Annihilation Sword intent, he was unable to cause any damage to this silver character, nor was he able to expel it. It was as if it had found a home. It had taken root and didn't move at all. Currently, Chu Mu couldn't sense any use of this silver character. Or rather, he couldn't sense any harm it could bring him. Chu Mu liked to be in control of everything. Even if he couldn't control it, he would at least know what was going on. However, the current situation was not only out of his control, but he also didn't know what it was. However, Chu Mu didn't think that something that appeared from the corpse of a divine guard would be anything good. It seems like I have to capture a peerless powerhouse of the celestial race alive and search their memories. Chu Mu thought to himself. He used a wisp of eternal sword intent and scattered it around the silver rune. He didn't know if it would be useful, but he had to do it. Among the celestial race, every peerless powerhouse would automatically become a divine guard. They would also split a bit of their primordial spirit light and inject it into their primordial spirit life lamp, which would be stored in the Forbidden God Palace. If the life lamp was still burning, it meant that the divine guard was still alive. If it was extinguished, it meant that they were dead. In an instant, a total of 256 primordial spirit life lamps had been extinguished. It had only been a short period of time. This meant that these 256 divine guard had died at almost the same time. It was also very likely that they had died at the same place. This kind of unforeseen event alarmed the upper echelons of the celestial race. All the elders had appeared. The elders all had incomparably solemn expressions. At the same time, a total of 256 divine guard had died. This was definitely a huge blow to the celestial race. From ancient times until now, such a loss had only occurred in the ancient era. 256 divine guard, that was more than half of the celestial race's divine guard. Who exactly killed them? One of the grand elders was filled with murderous intent. They didn't connect the murderer to Chu Mu. After all, a few years ago, Chu Mu had been chased down by a second refinement divine guard of the celestial race. Even if his strength had increased significantly in the past few years, it was impossible for him to reach such a level. It had to be known that among the 256 divine guard, there were 26 divine guard of the third refinement. One of them was even at the limit of the third refinement. Under normal circumstances, the limit of the third refinement of the celestial race would be stronger than the limit of the human race. The murderer, they guessed, was a group of people, a group of peerless powerhouses. It wasn't a single person. Tianji, calculate who it is that dares to make an enemy out of my celestial race. With the help of the Heaven's Mystery Pagoda, it was a blur and was blocked. This was because Chu Mu had the sealed God compass. If the murderer is one person, then he must have been hit by the heavenly slaughter curse after killing the 256 divine guard of the celestial race. Tianji used the heavenly slaughter curse to calculate. An elder proposed a hypothesis. Tianji used the heavenly slaughter curse to calculate. The result of the calculation shocked every elder of the celestial race. The murderer was actually one person, and it was someone they knew. Chu Mu. That's impossible. An elder exclaimed. They were very clear about Chu Mu's strength. A few years ago, he hadn't even reached the second refinement. No matter how fast he improved, it was already very good that he could reach the second refinement. How could he kill 256 divine guard of the celestial race? But the truth was the truth. The heavenly slaughter curse wouldn't lie. The appearance of the heavenly slaughter curse on Chu Mu meant that Chu Mu had at least killed 100 divine guard of the celestial race in a short period of time. This person's growth is too fast. It seems that this old man will have to personally take action, an elder said. A shocking aura burst out from his body. It was definitely an aura that surpassed the fourth refinement. Holy Venerate! In the celestial race, those above the fourth refinement were qualified to become elders. But the strongest of the elders were holy venerates, and there was more than one of them. The elders of the celestial race were going to personally take action. At the same time, the people of the 9 kings of the imperial court also found out that the person who killed the battle king was Chu Mu. including the various grudges between Chu Mu and the Battle King, as well as all of Chu Mu's deeds. They all turned into an information book and fell into the hands of the 9 kings of the imperial court. They flipped through it with interest. Chu Mu's various deeds, rising up in just a few decades, made them very interested in Chu Mu. What an interesting person. I'm getting more and more interested in him. Diablo smiled evilly. He stood up and wanted to personally take action. Not only did Diablo want to personally take action, the other 8 kings also moved. They had to take revenge for the Battle King. It was the same no matter who Chu Mu was. Chu Mu didn't know that the holy venerates of the celestial race were taking action because of him, and the 9 kings of the imperial court were also taking action because of him. Chu Mu didn't know any of this because he was stunned by the changes in front of him. He, who was in seclusion comprehending the invincible finger, suddenly felt a fluctuation in his pocket space. He checked and found that the 4 deep blue god pearls were shining brightly. The deep blue god pearls shining brightly was something that had never happened before. At least, from the time Chu Mu obtained them until now, it had never happened before. Hence, Chu Mu temporarily stopped cultivating and focused on the 4 pearls. The blinking became more and more frequent, and brighter and brighter. What is this foreshadowing? Chu Mu frowned. He didn't know much about the deep blue god pearls, so he didn't know what was happening in front of him at all. Just like Chu Mu, at this moment, in other places such as Cloud Heaven City, or the 9 kings of the imperial court, as long as they had the deep blue god pearls, the same thing happened to them. The changes in the deep blue god pearls caused the celestial race and the 9 kings of the imperial court to temporarily stop their actions against Chu Mu. Compared to Chu Mu, the deep blue god pearls were clearly many times more important. When the 18 deep blue god pearls all appeared, the light they emitted finally shot up into the sky. Instantly, a shocking change occurred in the sky. 18 rays of deep blue light shot up into the sky from different places in the deep blue world. The white clouds in the sky instantly dispersed, and the blue sky was replaced by a deep blue color. When the 18 rays of deep blue light gathered, the light spread out, and the deep blue retreated, revealing a blank space in the middle. It was transparent, and then some scenery appeared in the transparent space. It was a place with beautiful mountains and limpid waters. It was like a paradise. However, very few people knew what that place was. This scene only appeared for 3 breaths of time, but Chu Mu and many others remembered it deeply in their minds. They didn't miss any details. It wasn't only the people with the deep blue god pearls who saw this scene. Everyone in the deep blue world, as long as their vision wasn't blocked, could see this scene when they raised their head. It was just that some people knew and some people didn't understand. This matter was very important. At this time, any hatred would be put down, and all competition for benefits would be put down. Because nothing was more important than this. When the scene in the sky disappeared, the light of the deep blue god pearls also retracted, returning to their original appearance and falling down. Chu Mu reached out and grabbed all 4 deep blue god pearls in his hand. He sank into deep thought. Where is this place? What does the change in the deep blue god pearls mean? These 2 questions lingered in Chu Mu's mind. They also lingered in the minds of the people with the deep blue god pearls. Could it be that the place where the pearls appeared is the center of the deep blue world, where the world spirit is? A thought couldn't help but jump out of Chu Mu's mind. His breathing also became hurried. What was his goal in coming to the deep blue world? Even though he had gone through countless life and death battles and experienced many things, Chu Mu had never forgotten his original goal in coming to the deep blue world. He wanted to increase his strength so that he could complete his mission better. Now, he finally saw hope. Originally, he thought that he would only be able to do it after collecting all 18 deep blue god pearls. He hadn't expected such a change. Otherwise, he didn't know when he would be able to collect all 18 deep blue god pearls. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to do it in his entire life. After all, the deep blue god pearls could be anywhere. Without any hesitation, Chu Mu also let go of his killing intent towards the imperial court. Or perhaps it was only temporarily because he wanted to find the place indicated by the pearls. Chapter 1972. At this moment, only one phrase could be used to describe the current deep blue world. Total mobilization. Yes, every faction, big or small, even the independent cultivators were all mobilized. They were all searching for the scene indicated by the divine pearl and where it was. Of course, most people didn't know where it was, but it didn't hinder their enthusiasm. That was because it was a phenomenon. It was a heavenly phenomenon. Whenever a heavenly phenomenon appeared, it would definitely be related to a great treasure. Wealth moved people's hearts. To cultivators, treasures were equivalent to wealth. They were even more useful than wealth. They were willing to risk their lives for it. The entire world was mobilized. It had to be said that the efficiency was astonishing. After a few mistakes, they finally found the location of the heavenly phenomenon. It had to be said that many hands made light work. Almost the entire deep blue world had been searched, and it took them half a year to do so. In this half a year, Chu Mu and the others didn't encounter any attacks, nor did they encounter any strong enemies. Feng Wuhan and the others had all cultivated the intermediate demon spirit body and the new 10,000 prison breaking technique. Their strength had increased once again. Even the weakest, Wang's son, had the strength of an early-stage third refinement. The strength of the third refinement was enough to stand tall among the experts in the deep blue world. There were very few fourth refinement peerless experts and even fewer fifth refinement peerless experts. After many life and death battles, the ancient Sword Union members had already become very close. They were good brothers who had accompanied each other through life and death. The five of them followed Chu Mu's operation. Perhaps to them this was a very good opportunity. Without any hesitation, everyone followed Chu Mu in the direction indicated by the divine pearl. They weren't the only ones. The other experts also hurried over. The vast sea stretched as far as the eye could see. The mighty sea breeze constantly blew, causing everyone's hair to flutter. However, it couldn't obstruct their line of sight. Chu Mu's group of 6 quickly swept across the vast sea and flew forward. In the distance there were also figures. At that moment, a huge ship that was shining with golden light was flying through the air. It was flying at a speed that was not inferior to that of a third refinement expert. A powerful and vast aura spread out from the huge ship and swept out in all directions. Wherever it passed, the air was repelled and formed a storm. That huge, shining golden ship went on a rampage. It did not care if there were other people flying on the route. It only cared about rushing forward. With the speed of the third refinement and such a huge ship, if it was hit, it would be damaged. Coincidentally, the ship's flight path was exactly the same as Chu Mu's flight path. Chu Mu and the others had no choice but to quickly dodge. They felt a vast aura rush past them in an instant. That kind of energy fluctuation caused them to be extremely shocked. At the same time, they were also somewhat annoyed. Lei Ba's temper was the most explosive. Without saying anything, he directly attacked and punched out. This was a punch filled with anger. It was like a lightning dragon breaking through the air. With his strength at the peak of the third refinement, its power was shocking. With a boom, the lightning dragon directly hit the ship's body and instantly exploded. The ship only shook slightly, and where it was hit, a light pattern spread out. The ship's body was not damaged in the slightest, causing everyone to be incomparably shocked. It could actually withstand the punch of a third refinement expert without being damaged in the slightest. This shining golden ship was too shocking. Suddenly, Chu Mu felt an intense sense of danger. Without hesitation, he immediately pulled Lei Ba and quickly retreated. A sword light appeared out of nowhere and pierced towards Lei Ba. Just a little bit, and Lei Ba's head would be pierced by the sword light. No one doubted it because the sharpness of that sword light was incomparably shocking. It could easily kill Lei Ba, who was in the third refinement. Even a third refinement expert would not be able to resist. This kind of strength meant that the people on the golden ship were extremely powerful. In a situation where they did not know anything, no one immediately attacked. Leba stared fiercely at the golden ship in the distance and clenched his fists. Just now, if not for Chu Mu's quick reaction, he would have been killed. This kind of hatred could not be let go just like that. Don't worry, the ship's destination is definitely the same as ours. Kong Lu patted Leba's shoulder and smiled. In his eyes, a cold light flashed. The 6 of them were good brothers who had gone through many life and death situations. Perhaps they were not as generous as dying in the same year, month, and year, but they were definitely brave enough to live and die together. And they also understood that in a situation where they did not know anything about the other party, it was not good to act rashly. In addition to the golden ship, there were also experts flying chariot. There were raging flames burning on the wheels of the chariots, emitting blazing light and heat. The chariot was so fast that it left 2 scorch marks in the void wherever it passed. Sun Chariot! Feng Wuhan exclaimed. I did not expect that even the Sun King would be alarmed. Kong Lu said with a hint of respect in his eyes. Sun King. Compared to them, Chu Mu was not clear about the other party's identity. After all, he had been an unparalleled expert for too short a time and had been fighting all the time. He did not have the time to understand anything. The Sun King was an expert 1,000 years ago. At that time, he already possessed the strength of the middle-level 4th refinement. Now that 1,000 years have passed, his strength must be even stronger. Xia Yongxuan said simply. Indeed, 1,000 years ago, he was at the middle-level 4th refinement. After 1,000 years, he should have improved a little. He should be at the advanced level 4th refinement. Perhaps, he might even reach the peak level 4th refinement or even higher. Even a famous unparalleled expert like the Sun King from 1,000 years ago had appeared. Chu Mu did not find it strange that other experts had appeared. Who wouldn't covet the biggest secret of the deep blue world? Moreover, these unparalleled experts should know that finding the spirit of the world and obtaining the recognition of the spirit of the world would make one the child of the world. What was the child of the world? In layman's terms, it was called the child of the world. One would obtain a part of the deep blue world's power. That power would be incomparably powerful and could easily kill any unparalleled expert. Even a sacred venerate was no exception. Such a temptation was something that even a sacred venerate could not resist. Moreover, becoming the child of the world meant that one could become the lord of the world, the master of the world. In that case, all living creatures living in this world would become their own people. So what if it was a dynasty? So what if it was a powerful sect? Could it be compared to a world? The mysterious expert on the golden ship, the Sun King who was driving the Sun Chariot, the Frost King who was riding on an ice dragon that was hundreds of feet long one after another, unparalleled experts that had not appeared for hundreds or even thousands of years appeared one after another, rushing over from all directions. The location indicated by the divine pearl was on an island. It was a small island with lush trees and beautiful scenery. It was like a paradise on earth. When Chu Mu's group of 6 arrived, there were already many unparalleled experts gathered here. Powerful auras were constantly emitted from their bodies, spreading out in all directions. What dense yuan qi! Feng Wuhan was astonished. The heaven and earth yuan qi on this small island was frighteningly dense. It was as if it was about to liquefy. It filled every corner of the island. Compared to this island, the cultivation holy land of any major power was nothing. What made everyone surprised and puzzled was that on this island with such dense and pure yuan qi, there were no beasts or races other than vegetation. The power of spiritual energy swept across without any obstruction. It directly saw everything on the island clearly. It was also because of this that Chu Mu was very puzzled. Was this the place indicated by the deep blue divine pearl? Was it related to the world spirit? Why didn't he discover anything? It wasn't only Chu Mu who didn't understand. The other experts also didn't understand. Other than the yuan qi of heaven and earth being denser and purer, there didn't seem to be anything else worth mentioning. To absolute experts, though the density and purity of the yuan qi of heaven and earth was helpful, it wasn't the main reason why their cultivation increased. More and more unparalleled experts arrived and surrounded the island, but they did not discover anything. This situation naturally made everyone's faces turn ugly, especially those unparalleled experts who had been in seclusion for hundreds or even thousands of years. Some of them were at a critical moment in their seclusion, but they had to give up halfway. It was equivalent to decades of effort being wasted. If one's hopes were not proportional to their gains, they would feel uncomfortable in their hearts. At this moment there was a sudden change. A large amount of yuan qi gathered from all directions. As it whistled, it was as if countless dragons were swimming and rushing over, all pouring into the island. At this moment, the trees and grass on the island were all decomposed under the incomparably dense yuan qi and integrated into the yuan qi. This change immediately shocked many experts, and they all stared at it without blinking. The yuan qi seemed to be getting denser and denser, as if it had turned into a substance. It let out an astonishing roar, causing everyone's bodies to sway and almost be sucked in. They had to use their strength to stabilize themselves. In front of them, they could no longer look directly. They could only see the yuan qi that was so dense that it could not be dispersed. Their spiritual energy was also minced and could not be examined. They could only wait silently. This change lasted for a full hour before it weakened. After a quarter of an hour, the tornado-like yuan qi gradually calmed down. The island had completely changed. The trees on it had completely disappeared, leaving only a bare island. A huge stone tablet that was at least 10,000 feet tall stood in the center of the island, like a divine sword. The stone tablet was a simple dark gold, full of vicissitudes and nobility. On it, there were 5 even more profound dark gold words: Deep Blue 18 Hells. Chapter 1973. I am the spirit of the world. I reside in the deep blue 18 levels of hell. You must leave a mark on the world monument before you can enter the deep blue 18 levels of hell. If you have the corresponding deep blue sacred pearl, you can enter directly with it. Rows of words appeared on the stone monument. From top to bottom, there were a total of 4 rows. The 4 rows of words appeared for 10 breaths of time before they gradually disappeared. The world spirit was within the deep blue 18 hells. If one wanted to enter the deep blue 18 hells, there were 2 conditions. The first was to leave a mark on the world stele, which was the 10,000 zhang tall stone stele in front of them, to obtain the qualifications to enter. The second condition was to possess the deep blue god pearl. There are only 18 deep blue sacred pearls. Theoretically, 1 pearl corresponds to 1 person. Only 18 people can enter directly. Chu Mu thought to himself, but I have 4 deep blue sacred pearls. Also, what does the corresponding deep blue sacred pearl mean? Chu Mu thought for a while and came up with a conclusion. Could the so-called corresponding deep blue sacred pearls correspond to the deep blue 18 levels of hell? There were 18 deep blue sacred pearls and 18 levels of hell. To enter the first level of hell, one would need a 1-star deep blue sacred pearl, and so on? Whether it was true or not was just a guess, but it could be tested. While Chu Mu was thinking, someone had already made a move. He quickly approached the stone monument and struck with his palm. The palm was like a heavenly blade that struck the world monument. The 10,000-foot-tall stone stele seemed to be rooted in the foundation of the deep blue world. It was incomparably stable. Even the all-out attack of a second refinement elite could not shake it at all. It was as if a heavenly blade had slashed down heavily on the world's steel. It instantly shattered but did not leave any mark. The second refinement expert stared at the world monument in disbelief. He did not give up and struck again. This time, it was not an ordinary strike. He used his ultimate move. The blade light was like a prison that descended from the sky. It cut through the void and forcefully created a pitch-black crack. The power was shocking. The hellish blade light struck the world monument, but it shattered instantly. The world monument did not move at all. There was no mark left on it. This attack was the most powerful attack of the second refinement cultivator. However, it did not even leave a mark. His expression turned extremely ugly. Then, a few other second refinement experts attacked with all their might. One of them even had the strength of a half-step to third refinement, but he could not leave any mark on the world's steel. At this moment, a sword light seemed to come from the horizon and instantly slashed at the world's steel. The aura emitted by the sword light made it clear that it had the power of the third refinement. Moreover, it was at least at the advanced third refinement. The sword light hit the stone tablet, but it didn't dissipate like before. Instead, it lasted for a short moment before a sword mark appeared on the world's steel. Then, a black light shot out from the world's steel and hit the person who had attacked. That person disappeared under the black light. Everyone saw it with their own eyes, and they were bewildered. He didn't know if that person died under the black light or passed the World Monuments test and entered the deep blue 18 hells. Without any hesitation, more and more people attacked. Rays of light, be it sword light, finger force, or fist radiance, they all bombarded the world's steel. Everyone finally understood. If what the world's steel said was true, that as long as one could leave a mark on the world's steel, they would be able to enter the deep blue 18 hells. Then, one had to have the strength of at least the third refinement to be able to leave a mark on the world's steel. Anyone below the third refinement wouldn't have the qualifications to enter. After understanding this, the faces of the first refinement and second refinement experts, who had gone through untold hardships to rush here, all turned gloomy. They were extremely unhappy. They didn't know that not being able to enter was the best outcome for them. Otherwise, with their strength, how could they compete with the third refinement, fourth refinement, or even fifth refinement experts? They would be like ants that could be easily killed. Chumu didn't make a move. He was carefully observing. He had 4 deep blue god pearls, but he didn't have a 1-star deep blue god pearl. If his guess was right, there might be people who could use the 1-star deep blue god pearl to enter the deep blue 18 hells. However, after observing for a long time, those who could enter all relied on their own strength. Those who couldn't enter weren't strong enough. Chumu's group of 6 also made a move, leaving a mark on the world's steel. Their bodies were hit by the black light, and they only felt dazed for a moment, as if they were passing through time. Before they could react, that feeling had already disappeared, and the scenery in front of them changed greatly. The sky was dark, and thick smoke billowed. Dark clouds covered thousands of miles, and the atmosphere was gloomy and oppressive. It was like the atmosphere before a storm, and it made it difficult for people to breathe. In the distance, it seemed as if there was no end to it, and smoke filled the air. Chumu's group of 6 appeared. Other than them, there were other peerless experts, and they all had the strength of at least the third refinement. Chumu didn't know that there were so many peerless experts in the deep blue world. Moreover, they all had the strength of at least the third refinement. At a glance, there were at least thousands of them. There were human race, celestial race, sea race, and other races. Suddenly, a person's figure disappeared from the crowd. This scene was noticed by many, and Chumu also noticed it. Disappeared? Is he dead? Or has he entered the second hell? That person has a 2-star deep blue god pearl. Suddenly, an incomparably powerful aura spread out from a peerless expert, covering the entire place. That terrifying pressure was like an ancient mountain falling from the sky, suppressing all directions. Who has the deep blue god pearl? Hand it over. This expert was a senior elder of the celestial race, a saint sovereign. He was domineering and powerful. Although the world spirit didn't say where it was located in the deep blue 18 hells, everyone's first thought was that the world spirit was in the 18th hell. This was a very normal thought. Right now, they had all entered the first hell, but they didn't know how to enter the second hell. However, someone had already used the deep blue god pearl to enter the second hell. It was equivalent to walking in front of them. With the same opportunity, that person had a greater chance of entering the 18th hell and finding the world spirit. In other words, whoever obtained the deep blue god pearl could use it to enter the next level of the deep blue 18 hells faster, seizing a greater opportunity. No one was willing to miss such an opportunity. However, there were only a total of 18 dark blue sacred pearls. Currently, there were only 16 of them left. However, there were thousands of experts present. Who had them? Although the aura of the celestial race's saint sovereigns was extremely powerful, it couldn't suppress everyone. Boom, boom, boom. Powerful auras soared into the sky. They were also saint sovereigns' auras. They were evenly matched with the auras of the celestial race's saint sovereigns. They were as sharp as swords, as hot as fire, and as cold as ice. The auras of different saint sovereigns were completely different. Could it be that you all want to become enemies with my celestial race? The celestial race's saint sovereign, who was the first to release his aura, had a cold expression. He glanced over and spoke in a threatening tone. Although the celestial race is strong, my human race isn't weak either, said a human saint sovereign. That's right. I heard that recently, the celestial race sent out a large number of divine guards to hunt down a human junior. Not only did they not succeed, but several hundred divine guards died under the sword of a human junior. TSK. When I first heard this, I really didn't dare to believe it. This was another human saint sovereign. Anyone who becomes enemies with my celestial race must die. There wasn't just one saint sovereign who had entered. There were more than a dozen of them. The moment this saint sovereign finished speaking, he instantly attacked and pointed a finger. A white finger energy pierced through the void, seemingly transcending the limits of time and space as it shot toward Chu Mu. Fast, it was simply too fast. It was so fast that Chu Mu couldn't react at all. The difference in strength between the two was simply too great. Without using a secret technique, Chu Mu's strength could only reach the third refinement. The difference between the third refinement and the fourth refinement was very obvious. The difference between the fifth refinement and the third refinement was even greater. Even if Chu Mu's soul was stronger, his thoughts were sharper, and his reactions were faster, he couldn't surpass this difference. If nothing unexpected happened, that finger energy would completely pierce through Chu Mu's forehead and shatter his Yuan spirit. In fact, long before they entered the first layer, the celestial race's saint sovereigns already knew of Chu Mu's existence. This was because they could sense the aura of the heavenly slaughter curse. This finger energy was too sudden. It also exceeded the expectations of many human saint sovereigns. However, something unexpected happened. A sword appeared out of nowhere and pierced toward the finger energy, shattering it. Then, a white-robed figure appeared in front of Chu Mu, his back facing Chu Mu, protecting him. Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign. Only then did Chu Mu react. For a moment, he was terrified. Fortunately, Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign had intervened. Otherwise, he would have died without a doubt. He wouldn't even have the chance to use the Sword Sect spiritual seal. Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign, do you really want to become enemies with my celestial race? The celestial race's Saint Sovereign, who tried to kill Chu Mu, frowned and narrowed his eyes. Murderous intent lingered in his eyes as he stared at Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign coldly. The other celestial race's Saint Sovereigns also stared at Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign with unfriendly expressions. They looked like they were about to attack. So what? Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign said coldly. He raised the sword in his hand and sword chi surged. He wasn't afraid at all. The other human race's Saint Sovereigns also released their auras to support Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign. Perhaps there were fewer human races saint-sovereigns here than the celestial races saint-sovereigns, so they didn't have much of an advantage. However, if they started fighting, the celestial races saint-sovereigns wouldn't be able to gain much of an advantage. The celestial races saint-sovereigns, such as the oceanic race, looked like they were watching a good show. To them, even if the foreign races weren't enemies, they wouldn't be friends either. Hence, it would be best if the celestial race and the human race fought and some of them died. That way they would be more competitive in the deep blue 18 hells. Chapter 1974. The atmosphere was tense as the celestial saint-sovereigns and the human saint-sovereigns confronted each other. Even the celestial race's fourth refinement and the human race's fourth refinement and third refinement experts were confronting each other. However, there was a human race expert standing on the other side. This group of people was the imperial court's 9 kings and their sky generals. There were more than 20 of them, and they all looked coldly at Chu Mu. Everyone knew that the grudge between Chu Mu and imperial court was huge. Although imperial court's experts were all humans, it was normal for them to not protect Chu Mu under such a huge grudge. However, in the face of a racial grudge, imperial court's actions were also criticized. Chu Mu was sure that whether it was the sky race or the imperial court, once they had the chance, they would attack him without hesitation and do their best to kill him. You can protect Chu Mu for now, but you can't protect him forever. The sky race's Saint Venerables left with the sky race's experts after saying that. Under such circumstances, the sky race couldn't start a war with the human race. Even if they won in the end, they would have to pay a heavy price. Furthermore, there were other races eyeing them. The human race naturally didn't want to start a war. Hence, they didn't stop the sky race's experts from leaving. This disappointed the other races who were prepared to watch a good show. However, they knew that unless there was something wrong with their heads, they wouldn't start a war. Very quickly, the various races left. Before the imperial court's experts left, one of them smiled strangely and made a throat-slitting gesture towards Chu Mu. Very quickly, only the Sky Sword Saint Venerables and Chu Mu's group remained. "Thank you, Sky Sword Saint Venerables and the other Saint Venerables." Chu Mu bowed with his sword. The Sky Sword Saint Venerables only smiled and didn't say anything courteous. His relationship with Chu Mu wasn't bad. "You are a junior of the human race, and you caused the sky race to suffer heavy losses. Naturally, we have to protect you." A Saint Venerables with a white beard laughed loudly. The sky race called themselves the descendants of the sky gods. They were high above the other races. Not everyone agreed with the sky race's position, especially those with high cultivation realms. However, they knew how strong the sky race was, so they weren't willing to become enemies with the sky race. However, they would protect someone like Chu Mu, who dared to become enemies with the sky race and even caused great losses to the sky race. They wouldn't allow the sky race's people to kill him. The strength of a race was not just the strength of one person, but the strength of the majority. The status of the celestial race was extremely stable. It was like a myth, but this myth was beginning to be broken by a junior of the human race. If Chu Mu was alive, the sky race's legend would be broken. As time passed, their position would gradually be affected. In the end, they wouldn't be able to stand above the other races. If there was less fear towards the Tian clan, then the strength of the various races would not be weaker than the Tian clan. Even though the people of the Tian clan all had outstanding talent, their numbers were too small, with only a few million of them. As for the human clan, they were thousands of times stronger than them. With such a huge population base, it was not surprising that more geniuses would appear. The race had to be strong, and the people had to be strong themselves. The experts here all understood this. "Chu Mu, you guys will travel with me next," the Sky Sword Saint Venerable said. His meaning was clear. He wanted to protect Chu Mu, so that he wouldn't be killed by the sky race's experts. "Thank you for your kindness." Chu Mu refused. He was very clear about his purpose in entering the deep blue 18 hells. Maybe if he traveled with the Sky Sword Saint Venerables, he would be able to survive even if he encountered the Sky Race's Saint Venerables. However, it wasn't realistic to travel with the Sky Sword Saint Venerables because Chu Mu had 4 deep blue divine pearls. Once he reached a certain level, he would be able to use the pearls to enter the next level. That was his advantage. He couldn't give up on it. Chu Mu, you have to know that you are a thorn in the eyes of the Sky Race. Even the experts of the Imperial Court want to kill you. Also, the experts of the other races won't let you grow if they have the chance. With your current strength, you won't be able to move an inch in this place. A human Saint Venerable said. His tone was indifferent, but his words were true. Thank you, Senior. However, just like what the Sky Race said, you can protect me for a while, but you can't protect me for a lifetime. Chu Mu saluted with his sword and said seriously, I, Chu Mu, have experienced many trials and tribulations. I have been on the brink of death many times. I was lucky and had the help of powerful people. However, no matter what, one's own strength is the most important. The deep blue 18 hells won't be that simple. If you delay your journey because of me, I will feel guilty. Moreover, if you want to kill me, it won't be that easy. At the last sentence, a cold smile appeared on Chu Mu's face. Everyone looked at Chu Mu deeply and didn't say anything. After a long time, the Sky Sword Saint Venerables spoke again. Since you have made your decision, I won't persuade you anymore. However, be careful. I hope you can still see it. Live well. The seniors of the human race all said to Chu Mu. They all knew that they could protect him for a while, but they couldn't protect him for a lifetime. They also knew that the real experts walked out from countless life and death situations, not from being protected. The experts of the human race left one after another. Some of them walked together, while others walked alone. Apart from using the deep blue divine pearl, many people wanted to know how to leave the first prison and enter the second prison. Every second mattered because entering the second prison first meant that they would be one step ahead. Chu Mu and the other 5 also left together to find a way to enter the second prison. A pair of eyes flashed across the sky above the first prison. Everything that happened before couldn't escape the gaze of that pair of eyes. However, no one noticed it. Or rather, no one saw it. The first prison was vast and boundless. Chu Mu and the other 5 moved quickly for more than an hour, but they didn't meet anyone else. Thousands of peerless experts of various races disappeared after entering the first prison as if they had fallen into the sea. In the blink of an eye, another few hours passed. They still didn't meet anyone else, nor did they find a way to enter the second prison. However, they were able to cultivate to their current level and had a high cultivation base. They weren't affected at all and continued to search. In the blink of an eye, 1 day passed, 2 days passed, 3 days passed. Some people started to feel impatient. If it was any other time, they might be able to last longer. However, someone had already entered the second prison a few days earlier than them. There were too many variables in these few days. They had to find a way to enter the second prison as soon as possible. In these few days, Chu Mu and the others racked their brains and made many guesses. Unfortunately, none of them came true. Another 2 days passed. What do we have to do to enter the second prison? Leiba said in frustration. Their every move was under the surveillance of that pair of eyes in the sky. However, they couldn't see that pair of eyes. As if it had heard Leiba's words, a ray of light seemed to appear in that pair of eyes. Soon after, a rumbling sound came from the ground far away, attracting everyone's attention. A figure seemed to rise from the ground, growing bigger and bigger. In the end, it appeared in front of everyone like a small hill. It stretched its body. It was a giant beast that seemed to be made of a mixture of rocks and soil. It emitted a terrifying aura. Its 100 tall body seemed to be covered in a thick layer of armor. It looked like a pangolin that had been magnified countless times. Its eyes were scarlet and looked very shocking. Roar. The giant roar was like the roar of thunder, shaking heaven and earth. Terrifying sound waves rushed out and swept forward. The ground under the sound waves cracked inch by inch, snaking towards Chu-Mu and the others at lightning speed. Leaping, Chu-Mu and the others quickly dodged. They turned into 6 rays of light and rushed towards the giant pangolin from different angles. Perhaps it wasn't a pangolin, but it looked similar. Chu-Mu and the others didn't know what it was, so they called it that for the time being. The 6 of them had fought side by side many times, wandering between life and death. They cooperated with each other very well. There was no need for words, just a movement and a look was enough to understand each other's intentions. The giant pangolin emitted an extremely strong aura, reaching the limit of a 3rd refinement expert. Coupled with its huge body, it gave everyone a strong sense of oppression. Wave after wave of attacks came from all directions, all striking the enormous pangolin's body. However, countless sparks flew, but none of them were able to penetrate the pangolin's astonishingly thick armor. Only a few fragments were sent flying. Only Chu-Mu's sword left a rather deep mark on the pangolin's body, but it was still unable to harm the enormous pangolin. Its shocking defense made Chu-Mu and the others realize that this giant pangolin was not easy to deal with. However, that didn't mean that it was impossible to deal with. Sword domain change. Blood prison burns the heavens. Chu-Mu's strength instantly rose steadily, reaching the half-step 4th refinement. He was infinitely close to the true 4th refinement. In terms of strength, he had already surpassed the giant pangolin. Of course, with the pangolin's huge body, its strength was also very terrifying. The Annihilation Spirit Sword slashed down, the death of the common life sword style. A grayish-black sword chi streaked across the sky, silently landing on the giant pangolin's thick armor. This time, the shockingly thick armor was unable to block Chu-Mu's sword. The power of the Annihilation Spirit Sword intent was unleashed to the extreme, instantly cutting through the thick armor and into the pangolin's body. The intense pain caused the giant pangolin to go crazy. Its eyes emitted a red light, and a monstrous baleful aura surged out of its body. Its sharp claws tore through the sky, and its huge tail swept out. Even if there was a mountain, it would be smashed to pieces. Its terrifying power was displayed to the extreme. Chapter 1975. Endless Growth. Deathly Silence. Samsara of Life and Death. After 3 consecutive powerful sword moves, the giant pangolin was unable to withstand them. Its tail was cut off, and Chu-Mu's sword directly cut deep into its head. With the 6 of them working together, even though only Chu-Mu was able to cause damage to the giant pangolin, the other 5 attracted the giant pangolin's attention, allowing Chu-Mu to attack to his heart's content. When the giant pangolin fell, the ground shook as if a mountain had collapsed. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. The pressure that the giant pangolin gave them was very strong. "What is this thing?" Leiba kicked the giant pangolin's body and asked. Suddenly, the giant pangolin's body trembled, startling Leiba. He quickly retreated. Everyone was ready to fight, thinking that the giant pangolin was not completely dead and was about to counterattack. The giant pangolin did not counterattack. That tremble was caused by the giant pangolin's body gradually sinking into the ground. When the giant pangolin completely sank into the ground, a ray of light suddenly appeared and shot towards Chu-Mu. Chu-Mu could not dodge at all and was hit directly. Everyone's expression changed greatly. They were shocked and asked about it with concern. Chu-Mu carefully checked himself. He did not suffer any damage, but he also felt that there was an additional ray of light in his mind. When his consciousness came into contact with the ray of light, information was transmitted to his consciousness, allowing him to know the origin and use of the ray of light. "Brothers, I know what I have to do to enter the second layer." Chu-Mu smiled and said, "That giant pangolin just now is called a hell beast. It is a unique creature in the deep blue 18 prisons. Killing a hell beast will give you the right to enter the second prison. That ray of light is the right. That is to say, you have already obtained the right to enter the second prison and can enter it at any time? Feng Wuhan asked. Chu Mu nodded and said, however, this is not enough. Find a few more hell beasts to kill. Brothers, you have to obtain the right to enter as well. However, it was very difficult to find a hell beast. After 3 days, no one had found a second hell beast. Chu Mu, you should enter the second prison first. If you continue to delay, it will only give others more opportunities, Kong Lu said. Chu Mu had already obtained the qualification to enter the second prison. Now, he was accompanying them to search for the prison beast. However, after 3 consecutive days they found nothing. In a few more days, Chu Mu said, it was impossible for him to abandon his comrade, whom he could entrust his life to, and enter the second prison alone. 2 days later, they found a hell beast. However, that hell beast was being killed by someone, and the person who killed it was someone from the imperial court. He delivered himself to my doorstep. A handsome expert who was filled with evil qi stared at Chu Mu as if he was his prey. The expression on his face was indescribably evil. He was the 4th evil king of the 9 evil kings of the imperial court. Other than the evil king himself, there were also 3 evil kings under him. Each of them had the strength of the 3rd refinement. The most powerful one had reached the intermediate 3rd refinement, while the other 2 were at the beginner 3rd refinement. After the evil king finished speaking, without any warning, he pointed out a finger. A red finger energy broke through the air and shot towards Chu Mu. Its speed was shockingly fast. Just this finger was enough to show the evil king's tyrannical strength, because this casual finger had the power of the initial stage of the 4th refinement. The moment Chu Mu saw the evil king, he did not hesitate and used all his secret technique. Sword domain change. Blood prison burning heaven. Sword god descends. Under the secret technique, his strength increased layer by layer. He instantly surpassed the half 4th refinement and reached the beginner 4th refinement. He was close to the peak of the beginner 4th refinement. However, it was still not enough. The 10,000 truth prison breaking strength spread out and his strength increased again. Intermediate 4th refinement. The change happened in an instant. Chu Mu's strength directly rose to the middle stage of the 4th refinement. With 2 swords in hand, one sword shattered the red finger energy, while the other slashed through the air. Sword chi crisscrossed, slicing open the void as it attacked the evil king. The evil king did not dare to underestimate the power of the intermediate 4th refinement. The moment the evil king attacked, the 3 heavenly generals under him attacked as well. They attacked Feng Wuhan and the others. It was 3 against 5. For a moment, the battle was very intense. Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongshuan's strength had both reached the middle stage of the 3rd refinement. Although they were not as strong as the evil king's first general in terms of absolute strength, they were still able to hold their own against the evil king when they worked together. The other 2 heavenly generals under the evil king were experienced beginner 3rd refinement experts. In terms of strength, they were indeed stronger than Kong Lu, Lei Ba, and Wang Sunday. Therefore, when the 2 of them joined forces, they were able to resist Kong Lu and the others. They had a slight advantage. Relying on secret techniques to increase your strength. The evil king's tone was full of disdain. Secret techniques were called secret techniques because they were used at critical moments to turn the situation around. They were destined to not last for long. Moreover, they all had certain side effects. Once the duration was over, the user's strength would immediately decrease. Moreover, the side effects would cause all kinds of negative consequences, such as a decrease in strength or a weakening of the body. The evil king spread open all 10 of his fingers and lightly tapped the air. His speed was extremely fast and his frequency was astonishing. Streaks of red finger energy pierced through the air and shot out. The power of each streak of red finger energy increased again, reaching the peak of the 4th refinement initial stage. This kind of power brought about a certain degree of threat to the fourth refinement middle stage Chu Mu. From the Battle King's memory, Chu Mu knew that the evil king's strength was at the beginner fourth refinement before he went into seclusion. He had been in seclusion for more than 300 years. Even if his strength did not increase by much, it was certain that he had reached the intermediate fourth refinement. Moreover, the evil king must have mastered a powerful secret technique. Once he used it, his strength would increase again and completely surpass Chu Mu. Therefore, there was only one thought in Chu Mu's mind. He had to erupt with all his strength and try to kill the evil king in the shortest time possible. Even if he could not kill him, he had to severely injure him so that he could not display his full strength. In this way, even if he used the secret technique, the increase in strength would not be too obvious. Spirit of metal, innate spirit of water, spirit of thick earth. The three essences of the forces of heaven and earth were all activated. The spirit of metal increased the sharpness of Chu Mu's two swords. The innate spirit of water made Chu Mu's bones and muscles more flexible, making his movements more agile. The spirit of thick earth formed an amazing defense around Chu Mu's body. It could be said that Chu Mu's strength had been completely displayed. Clearly, he had reached the peak of the fourth refinement middle stage. His two swords shattered the evil king's red finger energy. Under the sword Aura Mirage, he appeared next to the evil king and unleashed an incomparably violent attack. Countless sword light was fierce and violent. It was like a volcanic eruption, like a lightning flash, like a mountain flood bursting through a dam, like a violent storm. In a breath, there were tens of thousands of swords. Each sword was fatal. The evil king experienced firsthand what was the meaning of violence. In an instant, the evil king felt that he could not breathe. He had to erupt with his strength. Otherwise, it was very likely that he would be crushed by Chu Mu's violent attack. Heavenly Evil Shield. Red light flickered around Evil King's body and condensed into strange shields filled with evil aura, defending against Chu Mu's dual swords. Heavenly Evil Palm Annihilation. What the evil king was most adept at wasn't finger techniques, but palm techniques. With a palm strike, a red light flickered in his palm. It was as if a burning red imprint had landed on solid ice. The terrifyingly high temperature directly burned through the air and slapped towards Chu Mu. The terrifying power was all condensed in the red light of the palm strike. Chu Mu's hair stood on end. This was the subconscious feeling of danger. He did not doubt that if he was hit by this palm strike, he would definitely die. There was no luck. The Heavenly Evil Palm was one of the 10 peerless techniques of the Undying Saint Emperor. Apart from the Saint King, the other 9 kings had each inherited a peerless technique of the Undying Saint Emperor. Moreover, after many years, they had all cultivated to a certain level. The peerless technique of the Undying Saint Emperor was naturally powerful. The power of the Heavenly Evil Palm was not weaker than the Invincible Finger. In fact, because the evil king had been immersed in the Heavenly Evil Palm for a longer period of time, its power was even greater than the Invincible Finger of the same level. The violent attack was instantly turned into a defense. Under the 6 paths sword style, 6 pitch-black vortexes formed a straight line and appeared on the trajectory of the Heavenly Evil Palm strike. The 6 paths sword style had an astonishing defensive power. The 6 pitch-black vortexes were all shattered by the concentrated energy of the Heavenly Evil Palm strike. The mysterious part of the Heavenly Evil Palm was that it was able to arrange the energy in an unbelievable way. It was highly concentrated instead of simply compressing it. This kind of concentration was more stable and sturdy. Compared to pure compression, it was like the difference between wood and rock. There was a huge difference in strength. Under the attack of the palm strike, the 6 pitch-black vortexes were shattered one after another. However, the 6 paths sword style was not useless. Its strong defensive power was able to block the Heavenly Evil Palm strike for a moment, causing the speed of the Heavenly Evil Palm strike to decrease slightly. This bought more time for Chu Mu. Attack against attack. The Annihilation's spiritual sword slashed out with the solitary sword style. Endless sword chi cut open the sky and slashed towards the heavenly evil palm strike. The eternal spiritual sword slashed down with the eternal sword style. Lotus blooming. Two swords combination, samsara sword style. The two swords crossed, heaven and earth cross slash. The heavenly evil palm strike, which had the power of the advanced fourth refining, was cut open by Chu Mu's sword style. In an instant, a terrifying power erupted. It was as if a star had exploded. The terrifying power rushed towards Chu Mu, causing the void to crack. Chu Mu's face fell. He had not expected this. After all, it was his first time encountering the heavenly evil palm. It was already amazing that he could see part of the heavenly evil palm strike. The power and profoundness of the Undying Saint Emperor's unique skill was not something that a newcomer like him could see clearly, no matter how high his comprehension ability was. Chapter 1976. The Dazzling Cross Sword Light and the Life and Death Reincarnation Sword Wheel attacked the evil king one after another. At the same time, the explosive power of the heavenly evil palm print also attacked Chu Mu. It tore through the void and destroyed everything in its path. This move was called destruction. It meant to destroy everything. Its power was extremely terrifying. The palm print was the first change and the explosive power was the second change. Attacking when the enemy was unprepared, the mysterious changes made it impossible for the enemy to guard against. Chu Mu quickly retreated. He waved his two swords and created layers of sword light walls in front of him to defend against the terrifying power. Chu Mu's counterattack shocked the evil king. He smiled evilly and grabbed at the void with his hands. They tore through the void like the claws of an eagle and grabbed at the life and death sword wheel and the cross sword light. With his exquisite skills and strength of the fourth refinement, he blocked the cross sword light from the life and death sword wheel and heaven and earth cross slash. He even crushed the cross sword light. The evil king was most proficient in his hands. His hands had become extremely hard after cultivating the heavenly evil palm. They were comparable to divine weapons. Layer after layer of sword curtains were shattered by the terrifying energy. It was as if a pair of invisible and brutal hands were viciously tearing apart paper. Without any mercy, they fiercely grabbed at Chu Mu. Chu Mu was directly hit and was sent flying. The terrifying power made his two swords tremble. His chi and blood churned and his sword origin fluctuated. He instantly retreated a few hundred meters. Evil King's body swayed and he split into two. Secret art, Evil King's illusory demonic body. As one of the 9 kings of the imperial court, a follower of the Undying Saint Emperor and a peerless expert of the fourth refinement, the evil king could not only have the heavenly evil palm print. He had other fortuitous encounters and obtained other inheritances. After many years, he gradually integrated them and created a secret art that suited him. All secret techniques were created by humans. The difference was that some people created secret techniques that were more profound and powerful, while some people created secret techniques that were simpler and more obvious. Fourth refinement powerhouses, whether it was in the deep blue world or the even more vast ancient god world, were all very impressive existences. Any one of them could be crowned as a king and establish a sect. They possessed astonishing accumulations, so it was not surprising that they could create some profound secret technique. The evil king's illusory demonic body was a secret art that the evil king created after spending countless time and energy. It was a secret art that he was proud of. It could be said that among peerless experts, the evil king was confident that his evil king's illusory demonic body was not inferior to the heavenly evil palm print, the evil king demonic body, the evil king's demonic body. Of course, the heavenly evil palm print was one of the Undying Saint Emperor's 10 great secret arts. It was a Saint Emperor level secret art. Its potential was above the evil king's illusory demonic body. However, when the evil king became a saint emperor one day, his evil king's illusory demonic body would continue to improve and become a saint emperor level secret art. The evil king's illusory demonic body was displayed and the evil king was split into two. Yes, there were two evil kings. Moreover, they were not illusions but real evil kings. These two evil kings were at the peak of the fourth refinement. One of the evil kings turned into a stream of light and rushed towards Chu Mu. The other evil king moved to the other side and instantly appeared in the battlefield where Kong Lu and the others were fighting. The sudden turn of events caused everyone to be incomparably shocked. Chu Mu's power erupted in an instant, forcibly stopping himself from retreating. He raised his two swords and rushed towards Kong Lu and the others like a swallow returning to its nest. However, he was intercepted by the evil king. After a collision, Chu Mu did not want to fight with the evil king. He borrowed the force of the collision and quickly rushed towards Kong Lu and the others. He knew very well that the evil king's strength was very tyrannical. An expert at the peak of the fourth refinement was even stronger than him, not to mention Kong Lu and the others. The evil king could easily kill all five of them. It was no different from squashing 5 ants. The difference in strength was too obvious. Chu Mu rushed over while the other evil king chased after him. The other evil king smiled evilly at Chu Mu and grabbed out with one hand. That hand seemed to reach into the void and with a grab, a figure was pulled out from the darkness of the void. He was Wang's son, who had hidden himself and was about to deal a fatal blow to one of the evil kings. Of the 6 members of the Ancient Sword Alliance, Wang's son was the weakest, but he was skilled in assassination. As a result, from the very beginning of the battle, Kong Lu and Lei Ba were tasked with fending off the 2 heavenly evil kings while he hid in the darkness of space, waiting for a suitable opportunity to strike and deal a fatal blow. It was fine if he didn't make a move, but once he did, he had to kill one of them first. Wang's son had already seized the opportunity and was about to deliver a fatal blow with all his strength. However, he was flicked into the dark void by the evil king and directly grabbed out. The difference between the early stage of the third refinement and the peak of the fourth refinement was too great. Wang's son. Everyone saw that Wang's son was grabbed by the evil king and was shocked. The evil king, however, gave Chu Mu an evil smile. The cold glint in his eyes was like ice, and his killing intent was dense. He grabbed Wang's son's neck and with a kacha sound, snapped Wang's son's neck. Wang's son constantly struggled, trying to escape the evil king's grasp. However, as his neck was snapped, all the strength in his body instantly disappeared. Like a snake that had its bones removed, he went limp. Of course, as a peerless expert, Wang's son was still alive. His broken neck could be reattached. However, the evil king did not give him the chance. With a flick of his hand, the evil king threw Wang's son's body at Chu Mu like a hidden weapon. Like a meteor, it bombarded Chu Mu. He could be sure that this throw was extremely powerful and fast. If he didn't care, Wang's son's body would definitely suffer an enormous wound when it hit the ground. Even if it was a middle-class devil soul body, it would be very hard to withstand. However, the instant Chu Mu was about to catch Wang's son's body, an incomparably intense sense of danger exploded from the depths of his heart. In his soul, waves of coldness pervaded. Danger. Incomparably intense danger. Chu Mu's intuition told him that if he continued to catch Wang's son, he would also die. He used sword chi shadow and quickly dodged. Wang's son's body swelled and exploded. The terrifying power tore Wang's son's body into pieces. Even his Yuan spirit was destroyed. The shock wave spread out in all directions, covering an area of several hundred meters. The ground shattered and spatial cracks spread out. Although Chu Mu's reaction was extremely fast, he was still a bit slower because he had to catch Wang's Sunday. That slight delay caused him to be partially affected. He felt his blood shark robe and blood shark armor shatter in an instant. The defensive layer formed by the spirit of earth and the innate spirit of water also collapsed in an instant. His mid-level demon astral body suffered a certain amount of damage. Wang Sun was dead. At this moment, there was only one thought in Chu Mu's mind. This thought made him ignore the pain caused by the damage to his body. The other evil king, who had chased after him, appeared behind Chu Mu's back. He raised one hand and turned it into a palm print, fiercely slapping towards Chu Mu's back. At the last moment, Chu Mu reacted. Relying on the instinct of countless life and death situations, he twisted his body. The power of the 10,000 truths' hell-breaking strength also gathered behind his back. The power of the innate spirit of water and the spirit of earth that had been defeated gathered again to defend his back. At the same time, the evil king's palm also fell on Chu Mu's back. The power of the heavenly evil palm instantly erupted. With a boom, Chu Mu's body trembled violently. A terrifying power surged on his back. The defense of the spirit of earth was broken again. The mid-level demon astral body's defense was also destroyed. Then, the defense formed by the 10,000 truths' hell-breaking strength was also destroyed in an instant. Finally, the defense of the innate spirit of water was also destroyed after a little resistance. The 4 lines of defense were all destroyed by the evil king's heavenly evil palm. The terrifying power of the heavenly evil palm blasted into Chu Mu's body, wantonly destroying it. Blood spurted out of his mouth uncontrollably. Chu Mu's body also rushed forward. Like a meteorite falling from the sky, he was thousands of meters away in an instant. This palm had condensed the full power of the evil king's clone's peak mid-level 4th refinement. It was a terrifying attack of the Holy Emperor's heavenly evil palm. The fact that it hadn't exploded Chu Mu on the spot surprised the evil king. However, he also felt that his palm had been blocked 4 times. It was precisely because of these 4 defenses that he hadn't directly exploded Chu Mu's body. However, after being hit directly by the heavenly evil palm, even if Chu Mu didn't die, he was on the verge of death. Wang Sun had exploded and died. Chu Mu had been sent flying by the terrifying palm. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Feng Wuhan and the others felt as if the sky had collapsed. Unimaginable grief surged out from the depths of their hearts, transforming into power and killing intent. The 4's auras became even more intense, especially Xia Yongxuan. Under his grief, his aura rose steadily, breaking through the early 3rd refinement, surpassing the mid-3rd refinement, and reaching the late 3rd refinement. Oh, you've comprehended grief. The evil king was slightly surprised. This was a very rare kind of power. Just like his evil intent, it belonged to the same level of power. If Xia Yongxuan's cultivation had reached the same level as his, he would definitely be able to fight against him. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. The late 3rd refinement was indeed very powerful, but compared to the 4th refinement, there was still a huge gap. Xia Yongxuan, who had erupted with power, sent the first heavenly general of Diablo flying with a single slash. The slash left a bone-deep wound on his body. A terrifying sense of sorrow kept invading his spiritual world, causing him to sink into an inexplicable sorrow. The second sword strike followed. The sword light pierced through the sky, causing the heavens and earth to mourn. However, this sword strike didn't manage to kill the evil king as expected. 2 fingers stretched out from the side and clamped down on Xia Yongxuan's sword. No matter how much power Xia Yongxuan released, it didn't move at all. Feng Wuhan's sword transformed into a hurricane. It roared as if it was going to shatter the void. In the next breath, it would crush the evil king's body. However, the evil king only flicked his finger. The power of his finger pierced through the void and hit the hurricane. The hurricane instantly stopped and then collapsed, dissipating into the wind. Chapter 1977. Shatter the Spirit. Feng Wuhan roared. His face was filled with determination and ruthlessness. Without hesitation, he shattered the spirit of the storm. He had obtained the spirit of the storm from the Ice Palace in the Ice Secret Realm. It was part of the Ice Saints collection and was very precious. It contained a shocking amount of energy and mystery. After refining it, every time he tried to comprehend it, Feng Wuhan could feel his progress in the way of the wind. The spirit of the storm had also greatly increased Feng Wuhan's battle prowess. As long as he had the spirit of the storm, as long as he continued to comprehend it and persevered, there would be a day when he would become a fourth refinement peerless expert. He might even have a chance to become a fifth refinement peerless expert and become a holy sovereign. But now, Feng Wuhan had no choice but to do so. Wang's son had died. He had exploded before their eyes. Even his primordial spirit had completely dissipated. Not even his bones remained. Chu Mu had been struck by a palm. That palm was extremely powerful. It was unknown whether Chu Mu was dead or alive. Xia Yongxuan's sword had been clamped and he could not move. His furious attack had been easily shattered. He had no other choice but to shatter the spirit of the storm. In an instant, he had guided all the power of the spirit of the storm into his body. The power contained in the spirit of the storm was extremely powerful and majestic. It was instantly released and filled Feng Wuhan's body. Even with Feng Wuhan's third refinement strength, it was difficult for him to withstand it. If he had not cultivated the middle demon spirit body, such power would have been enough to make him explode in an instant. Even so, cracks began to appear in Feng Wuhan's dantian under the terrifying power. His tenacious meridians could not withstand the impact of the violent and vast power. They shattered inch by inch. His bones emitted a creaking sound that made one's teeth ache. His muscles swelled, and his veins protruded as though they were about to explode. Even his skin turned fiery red. Feng Wuhan suddenly felt as if a storm that could destroy the world was being nurtured within his body. This power was too tyrannical and filled with destructive power. If he did not release it, he would not be able to withstand it and would explode. Forcefully enduring the tearing pain, Feng Wuhan's face was ferocious. His eyes were red as he clenched his teeth. He used all his strength and poured it into the spiritual sword in his hand. Using one's own spiritual will to mobilize a vast amount of power that far exceeded one's realm was like asking a child to pull a heavy object that far exceeded the limits of his strength. It was extremely difficult. Feng Wuhan felt as if his head was about to split open. Only then did he muster up the terrifying power in his body and pour it all into the spiritual sword in his hand. That kind of destructive power caused the spiritual sword to tremble as if it could not bear the burden. One could imagine that the spiritual sword's spirituality would definitely be damaged after this. However, at this moment this was all trivial and insignificant. Die! Wind Without Trace let out an angry roar, as if he wanted to release all his strength and all the pain he was enduring. Right now, he was no longer as carefree as he usually was. Rumbling sounds resounded through the heavens and earth. The terrifying sword slashed out, turning into an incomparably shocking hurricane that tore through space and ground the earth as it blasted towards the evil king. The power of this sword had definitely reached the fourth refinement level. Moreover, it was not only at the beginner fourth refinement level, it had reached the peak of the middle fourth refinement level. It could already threaten the evil king's clone. In the face of Wind Without Trace's sword, the evil king's clone did not dare to underestimate it. He released two of his fingers and formed a palm. The power in his body was arranged in a strange way, condensing into a heavenly evil palm print that slammed towards the destructive hurricane. The destructive hurricane collided with the heavenly evil palm print. Immediately, it was penetrated by the heavenly evil palm print, but it did not dissipate. It continued to blast towards the evil king, while the heavenly evil palm print also blasted towards Wind Without Trace. Wind Without Trace's body cracked and was dripping with blood. He was practically a bloody man on the verge of collapse. In the face of the evil king's heavenly evil palm print, he had no ability to dodge at all. He knew very well that if he was hit by the heavenly evil palm print, he would definitely die. However, Wind Without Trace was not afraid. He forced a smile and welcomed death. His body directly shattered under the heavenly evil palm print. Xia Yongxuan watched as Wind Without Trace's body exploded like a prince's grandson. Even his primordial spirit was completely destroyed. He felt as if his heart had been ruthlessly stabbed by a sword. His relationship with Wind Without Trace was even deeper than that of Prince Sunday. This was because he and Wind Without Trace were very good friends long before the formation of the ancient Sword Union. They had known each other for decades. An indescribable sadness filled Xia Yongxuan's hair. As it fluttered, the violent yuan qi of heaven and earth all poured into his body. The sadness spread in all directions. His aura rose again, from the advanced third refinement to the peak of the third refinement, and then to the limit of the third refinement. Originally, Xia Yongxuan's strength was only at the early third refinement. Because of Prince Sun's death and Wind Without Trace's death, he had been stimulated twice and reached the limit of the third refinement. This kind of leap was unparalleled, and the increase was incomparably huge. It was unimaginable. However, Xia Yongxuan would rather his strength not increase at all than to have such an outcome. There were no ifs, no regrets. Everything had already happened. All he had to do was kill his enemy and avenge Prince Sun and Xia Yongxuan. However, the strength of the third refinement was still not enough. The gap between him and the evil king did not shrink at all. It was still so obvious. On the other side, Lei Ba and Kong Lu also exploded with all their strength. They ignored their own safety and attacked with all their might, severely injuring the two evil king heavenly generals. Just as they were about to kill, they encountered the other evil king's clone. "You guys go!" Lei Ba roared. Without any hesitation, he directly exploded the Thunderbolt core. The power contained in the Thunderbolt core was not inferior to the Storm Spirit. It was completely released and filled Lei Ba's body. Lei Ba clearly saw what had happened to Wind Without Trace. He knew that if he was like Wind Without Trace, he would not be able to cause any harm to the evil king's clone. He chose to self-destruct. Yes, with Lei Ba's strength at the early third refinement, the power after the Thunderbolt core was combined with the self-destruction of the two. The power of the self-destruction was enough to kill a middle fourth refinement expert. Even an advanced fourth refinement expert would most likely die if they were caught in the blast. A powerful force ran through every part of Lei Ba's body. Bolts of lightning shuttled in and out of Lei Ba's body, circling endlessly. It was as if the god of thunder had descended. Without any hesitation, Lei Ba burst out with a roar and charged towards the evil king's clone. Under the power of the Thunderbolt core, Lei Ba's speed reached the fourth refinement level. The terrifying power was filled with destruction, causing the evil king's heart to tremble. Not daring to let Lei Ba get close, the two evil king's clones quickly retreated and struck out with their palms. Two heavenly evil palms struck Lei Ba's body from the left and right, but Lei Ba forcefully withstood them. The evil king's clone's expression did not change. His 10 fingers continuously shot out. Streaks of red finger energy pierced through the air and landed on Lei Ba's body. Lei Ba forcefully withstood them. However, Lei Ba's expression became more and more ferocious, as if he was enduring increasing pain until he could no longer bear it. His body swelled, and countless bolts of lightning swam around. Under an earth-shattering sound, terrifying lightning connected the heavens and the earth. In just an instant, the surrounding tens of thousands of meters had turned into a purgatory of lightning. Every bolt of lightning had the power of the fourth refinement, destroying everything within the range. Lei Ba. Outside the purgatory of lightning, Kong Lu's face was filled with pain and helplessness, as well as hatred for his own lack of strength. Xia Yongxuan's white hair fluttered, and his aura rose once again. He could clearly feel the strength of a half-step fourth refinement. At the same time, more wrinkles appeared at the corner of Xia Yongxuan's eyes. He looked like he had experienced the vicissitudes of life, as if tens of thousands of years had passed in an instant. Under his sorrow, his strength rose rapidly. It wasn't without a price, but it overdrew on his life force. But as long as he could obtain the strength to kill the evil king, even if he had to overdraw on his life force, he wouldn't hesitate. Unfortunately, the half-step forth refinement was a bottleneck. The purgatory of lightning lasted for dozens of breaths of time before dissipating, revealing tens of thousands of meters of scorched earth. Countless holes were still emitting traces of heat. The two figures stood back to back, and the oval-shaped light barrier around them also dissipated at the same time. Ha 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 ha! The two evil king's clones couldn't stop laughing. They had survived the terrifying purgatory of lightning. Originally, with their strength, even if they merged back into their original bodies and had the strength of a high-stage fourth refinement, it would be difficult for them to survive under such power. They had no choice but to use the defensive secret treasure that the undying Saint Emperor had given them. The secret treasure blocked the purgatory of lightning, and its power had been completely exhausted, but he had survived. Only by surviving would there be hope. Kong Lu and Xia Yongshuan's eyes were filled with despair, but it was immediately replaced by raging flames of hatred. Wang Sun was dead, Feng Wuhan was dead, Lei Ba was dead, and Chu Mu's fate was unknown. Perhaps he was already dead. The 6 people of the ancient Sword Alliance had sworn to fight against the Imperial Dynasty. They had also obtained a great victory in the battle against the Imperial Dynasty. They had completely destroyed War King Wang's army and killed War King Wang. Moreover, their strength had increased by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. But now they were all dead. Only the 2 of them were left. Soon they would also die. All their past victories and achievements were like flowers in a mirror, like the moon in the water. They were like bubbles that would burst with a single poke. In the end, everything depended on strength. Without enough strength, everything was useless. Only with enough strength could one ensure their own survival. Only with enough strength could one ensure the survival of one's companions. Apart from Diablo's clone, Xia Yongshuan, and Kong Lu, Diablo's 3 celestial generals were unable to escape from the purgatory of thunderbolts. With their strength, they were no different from ants in the purgatory of thunderbolt. Just the slightest ripple would cause their bodies to shatter, leaving nothing behind. Even their souls had been shattered by the terrifying force of thunderbolts, completely dispersing into the surroundings. The outcome of opposing the Imperial Dynasty is death. Now it's time for the 2 of you to die. After surviving, the evil king's clone seemed to have become more talkative. Chapter 1978. Pain, extreme pain, intense pain swept through his body like a storm. Inside his body, there was a terrifying force that recklessly crashed, wreaked havoc, and destroyed his body. His meridians, bones, and organs were all attacked and torn apart. His own tyrannical strength was constantly resisting, and his astonishing vitality was constantly repairing his injuries. Pieces of broken and hard earth were pressed against his body. His whole body sank more than 10 meters into the ground. Intense pain spread throughout his body, constantly intensifying, and he could not move. This intense pain constantly stimulated Chu Mu. He did not fall into a coma, because he knew that at this time, he could not fall into a coma no matter what. Once he fell into a coma, what awaited him was death. Wang's son had died right in front of him. The scene of the explosion was extremely clear and vivid in his mind. Like a brand, it was engraved into his mind, unforgettable. Although Chu Mu didn't personally see the various things that happened afterwards, he heard it and felt it. Feng Wuhan was dead. Lei Ba was dead. Of the 6 people of the ancient Sword Union, 3 were gone. Only Xia Yongshuan, Kong Lu, and himself were left. His injuries were extremely serious, and he was enduring immense pain, as if he could die at any time. The power of the heavenly evil palm was too terrifying. It had blasted into his body, wreaked havoc, and exploded, attacking every part of his body. If this continued, he would lose all his strength, unable to resist, and be destroyed. Even his primordial spirit would not be spared, torn apart, destroyed, and completely dead. Death was not frightening, but Chu Mu did not want to die like this. He wanted to live. He resisted with his astonishing willpower, barely mobilizing all the strength in his body. Even if he overdrew it, he had to live, because only by living would there be hope. If he died, everything would be for naught. His goal, his mission, revenge for Wang Sun, revenge for Feng Wuhan, revenge for Lei Ba. But, so what? His injuries were extremely severe. Even though his life force was boundless and rich, it could not keep up with the speed of his body being destroyed. The natural water spirit and thick earth spirit had suffered 2 consecutive heavy blows. They were on the verge of collapse and were on their last breath. 30% of their blood essence had been burned away. The power of the sword god descends. Secret technique had also been scattered. There was only a tiny bit left after gathering it, and it could not be of much use. The divine desolate sword essence was nearly exhausted. The power of the intermediate demon spirit body had also been greatly consumed, and was about to be overdrawn. Only the sword essence and the strength of the 10,000 truths of breaking prison still had some strength left. However, even though these 2 forces were powerful, they could barely resist the heavenly evil palm force that had invaded his body. Even if he managed to dispel the heavenly evil palm force in the end, it would take a while for him to recover from such a serious injury. Would the evil king give him time? The answer was no. At this moment, Xia Yongxuan and Kong Lu, who were still alive, were no match for the evil king. Before the evil king, they were no different from ants. However, was there anything else he could do? Strength, everything depended on strength. Enduring the excruciating pain, Chu Mu's mind worked at high speed, constantly thinking of a solution. 2. The first was to use the sword sect spiritual seal to summon Senior Bai Ling. Senior Bai Ling's strength might be enough to kill the evil king. However, Chu Mu was not willing to use this method. He wanted to kill the evil king personally. Only in this way could he relieve the hatred in his heart. Moreover, the deep blue 18 levels of hell was only the first level. Later on, he might encounter more powerful enemies. Senior Bai Ling could only be summoned once. The second method was the last secret skill, Wither. It was a very overbearing secret skill. Once it was used, it could not be stopped. The 2 methods flashed through his mind. Without any hesitation, Chu Mu chose the second method. If the second method did not work, he would have no choice but to choose the first method. Yes, at this moment, Chu Mu wanted to kill the evil king personally. Summoning Senior Bai Ling would be using someone else's hand, which was not satisfying. The various mysteries of the Wither's secret skill quickly flowed through his mind. Chu Mu also began to use it. The Wither's secret skill overdraft one's life force and lifespan. Under the operation of the secret skill, from the deepest part of Chu Mu's body, there was a trace of gray aura. That gray aura emitted a shocking smell of death. As soon as the gray aura spread out, it was like a virus, spreading throughout Chu Mu's body. As soon as his life force appeared, it was covered by the gray aura and devoured. After devouring the life force, the gray aura grew rapidly. The origin of the wood avatar was also continuously releasing life force. However, this life force was also devoured by the gray aura. There was no escape. Originally, Chu Mu relied on the life force of the wood aspect origin and the life force of his body to repair his body that was damaged by the heavenly evil palm. Now, the 2 types of life force were devoured by the Wither secret skill to strengthen himself. Under the heavenly evil palm, his body was damaged even more and was on the verge of collapsing. At this moment, another change occurred. The strong Wither secret skill and the destructive heavenly evil palm collided. The heavenly evil palm wanted to destroy everything, including the Wither secret skill. However, the reality was that the heavenly evil palm was not able to destroy the Wither secret skill. Instead, under the Wither secret skill, the Wither secret skill was continuously corroded until it disappeared. Chumu's body also stopped collapsing. The life force continued to grow at a high speed at the cost of overdrafting one's lifespan. It was continuously devoured by the Wither secret skill and strengthened the Wither secret skill. The Wither secret skill also gradually spread throughout Chumu's body. The two evil king clones did not merge into one. One stood motionless while the other walked towards Kong Lu and Xia Yongshuan step by step. With each step, Kong Lu and Xia Yongshuan felt extremely heavy pressure. This pressure made it difficult for them to breathe, and they were on the verge of collapsing. "Kong Lu, let's go," Xia Yongshuan shouted in a low voice. His face was filled with determination. The strength of a half-step to fourth refinement was obtained at the cost of his lifespan. The gap between him and the evil king was still huge. However, since he could not fight against the evil king, he would not retreat. The ancient sword alliance could not be completely annihilated. There was only hope as long as someone was alive. Kong Lu knew that his strength was only at the initial third refinement. The gap between him and the evil king was even greater. Moreover, he was well versed in the Tao of space and had the cooperation of Xia Yongshuan. In theory, his chances of escaping were higher. At the very least, he had to stay alive and tell the Heavenly Sword Saint that Chu Mu had been killed. This was the only thing he could do. With a flash of his body, Kong Lu disappeared into the void. The evil king's clone smiled evilly. With a flick of his finger, it disappeared into the void. Immediately, a figure shot out from the void and flew backwards, spurting out blood. That flick did not kill Kong Lu. Instead, it severely injured him and made him lose the ability to escape. Xia Yongshuan and Kong Lu were the prey. Die. With a soft sound, the evil king pointed out two fingers. Red finger force pierced through the void and shot towards Xia Yongshuan and Kong Lu. For the evil king, he did not need to use the heavenly evil palm to deal with these two ants. The red finger force was too fast. It was beyond his sight and senses. Xia Yongshuan only saw a flash of red light in front of him. His thoughts seemed to have frozen and he could not react. "I'm going to die." This thought flashed through Xia Yongshuan and Kong Lu's minds. They were filled with regret and unwillingness. It seemed like a long time had passed. The two of them were puzzled. They did not feel that they had been hit. Unknowingly, a figure appeared in front of them. He was wearing a blood-red robe. His back was very familiar. However, his originally black hair was as white as snow and as bright as the moon. "You're not dead." The evil king was very surprised. He knew the power of the heavenly evil palm very well. After being hit directly by the heavenly evil palm, he could still survive. Moreover, he did not seem to be injured at all. This made him very surprised. What was even more surprising was that his originally black hair had turned white. "You're all still alive. How can I die?" Chu Mu's voice was indescribably cold. It made the evil king's clone tremble unconsciously. There seemed to be a chill in his bones. "In that case, I'll send you on your way." The evil king's clone smiled evilly. He flicked his 10 fingers and threw out a palm attack. This was the heavenly evil palm. Its power had reached the advanced fourth refining. It was very terrifying. A sword light flashed, like a crescent moon hanging in the sky. It was extremely fast. The 10 red finger forces were shattered in an instant. The astonishing and tyrannical heavenly evil palm print was also cut open by the sword light. After the heavenly evil palm print was cut open, it did not explode like before. This was because the power arrangement within it had been cut off by the sword light. The sword light was endless. It pierced through the void and attacked the evil king's clone. This sword had no beginning and no end. It was boundless and endless, and all living things were dead silent. The sword light was reflected in the eyes of the evil king's clone. His pupils contracted instantly. Uneasiness filled his heart. A trace of fear emerged from the depths of his soul. This feeling was unprecedented. He wanted to dodge, but he found that the speed of the sword light seemed to be faster than his thinking speed. He wanted to resist, but he also found that the speed of the sword light seemed to be faster than his reaction speed. There was no way to dodge, no way to resist. The sword slashed down directly. No! The evil king's clone screamed, but it stopped abruptly. The sword slashed through his body and split him into two. After the sword slashed open the evil king's clone, it did not dissipate nor did it stop. It instantly cut through the void and attacked the other evil king's clone. He had no idea what had happened. Chu Mu's strength had increased tremendously. He did not have time to think or hesitate. The remaining evil king's clone communicated with the light in his mind. It was the light that he had obtained from killing a prison beast. It was the key to enter the second prison. After the sword light passed, the evil king's clone disappeared. He left the first prison and entered the second prison. Chapter 1979. The sword mark tore through the ground and extended for tens of thousands of meters. The ground was scorched black and there were countless holes. The air was filled with shocking death chi and killing chi. With a single glance, one could tell that an extremely fierce battle had just taken place here. 3 silhouettes stood silently on the devastated land. Kong Lu's face was pale, and there was still a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. His aura was weak. Xie Wang's attack had severely injured him. However, he had already taken a healing pill. Coupled with the self-healing ability of the intermediate demon spirit body, his injuries had been alleviated to a certain extent. However, it would still take a considerable amount of time for him to fully recover. Xia Yongxuan's hair was gray and the wrinkles at the corner of his eyes were obvious. He looked like he had been through a lot and his skin wasn't as shiny as before. It was a little dim. Chu Mu's black hair had completely turned white. It was as white as snow and as white as the moon. His eyes, however, seemed even darker and deeper. His aura was also completely different from before. It was difficult to sense. In other words, it was impossible to tell what level Chu Mu's current strength was at just based on his aura. Brother Feng, Brother Lei, Brother Wang, I will take revenge for your deaths. Chu Mu broke this indescribable silence. In his cold voice, there was a determination. If he didn't take revenge, he wouldn't stop. Imperial Court, I will uproot it and completely destroy it. Our strength is still too weak. Kong Lu heaved a heavy sigh, feeling indescribably dejected. Brothers, I think it's better for you to leave Deep Blue 18 Hell. Chu Mu looked at Xia Yongxuan and Kong Lu and suggested. Xia Yongxuan and Kong Lu were silent. They were really unwilling. The death of their companions filled their hearts with hatred towards Diablo and the Imperial dynasty. They wanted to personally kill Diablo and destroy the Imperial dynasty. However, they were very clear that a single evil king was enough to easily kill them. If not for Chu Mu's timely appearance, they would have already followed in the footsteps of the other 3. If they weren't strong enough, how could they take revenge? I will avenge my 3 elder brothers, Chu Mu said. His gaze was cold and deep. After you 2 leave Deep Blue 18 Purgatories, find the location of the Imperial Court's 9 Great King divisions and kill all of them. The 3 of us will work together to completely destroy the Imperial Court's foundation. Those who entered the Deep Blue 18 Hells had only one chance to leave. After leaving, they would not be able to enter again. Chu Mu allowed Xia Yongxuan and Kong Lu to leave. First of all, although Xia Yongxuan and Kong Lu were both at the 3rd refinement realm, they could only be considered average in the Deep Blue 18 Hells, where one needed to be at least at the 3rd refinement realm to enter. Once they encountered a powerful enemy, they would not be able to put up much of a fight, just like when they encountered the evil king. Second of all, just as he said, the 2 of them would leave the Deep Blue 18 Hells and find out where the 9 king tribes were and destroy them. In the outside world, especially at this moment, when almost all the peerless experts at the third refinement realm and above had entered the deep blue 18 hells, Xia Yongshuan's half-step fourth refinement realm strength could be said to be invincible. No matter how unwilling they were, Xia Yongshuan and Kong Lu knew that if they stayed, not only would they not be able to help Chu Mu, but they would also be a burden to Chu Mu. Leaving was the best choice. Chu Mu, you must live, Xia Yongshuan said seriously. Kong Lu looked deeply at Chu Mu's white hair. He knew that Chu Mu must have paid a huge price for such a transformation. Only then could his strength reach such a shocking level. He killed the evil king's clone with one sword. However, he didn't dare to ask about the changes. It wasn't because he was afraid, but because he felt uncomfortable and powerless. Taking a deep breath, Kong Lu also spoke with unprecedented seriousness. Chu Mu, you must live. There is only hope if you live. I know. Chu Mu nodded. With unwillingness and hope, Xia Yongshuan and Kong Lu's figures faded bit by bit. After 10 breaths, they disappeared before Chu Mu's eyes. They had both left the deep blue 18 hells. One could imagine that there would be a bloody storm in the deep blue world because of the two of them. Retracting his gaze, Chu Mu looked into the distance. His deep eyes seemed to be able to see through time and space. Let's search for a few more days to kill the people of the imperial court, Chu Mu thought. After a few days, no matter what, he had to enter the second hell. With a flash of his body, he turned into a ray of sword light and flew away. His speed was extremely fast. Compared to when he was in his peak state when he used all kinds of secret techniques, he was at least a few times faster. A faster speed meant that Chu Mu could reach more places in the same amount of time. The few days he had now were equivalent to more than 10 days or even dozens of days before. It should be enough. His snow-like white hair fluttered in the wind, but in Chu Mu's heart, he didn't have the slightest bit of regret. No, if there was any regret, it would be regret. Why didn't he use Azure Wither earlier? Why did he wait until Feng Wuhan and the other two died before he made his decision? Under the Withering Secret Technique, Chu Mu's state was completely at its peak. He was so infatuated with this state. Blood prison burning sky. Sword God descends. Sword domain change. Myriad prison breaking true force. Originally, one of these 3 secret techniques required him to use a strange power. One would consume his blood essence. One would consume the power of the secret technique until the secret technique's power was completely exhausted. One would consume all aspects of his body, and the last was the power derived from the combination of the divine wilderness sword origin and the mid-grade demon spirit body. However, under the Withering Secret Technique, these 4 powers became subsidiary powers. They became a fixed power, as if they were inexhaustible, allowing Chu Mu to squander them freely. In other words, after using the Withering Secret Technique, the power in Chu Mu's body no longer had the so-called blood essence power, Sword God Descends Secret Technique, Sword Domain Change, and Myriad Prison Breaking True Force. They all belonged to the Withering Secret Technique. However, as long as Chu Mu improved in any one of these powers, the new power would also improve. Furthermore, the life force that was constantly being produced in his body was constantly being devoured by the Withering Secret Technique, causing Chu Mu's body to be in a very strange state. The recovery speed of all his powers increased by many times, and the strength of his body also increased greatly. His self-healing ability was also strengthened by 10 times or even 100 times. This was the most basic power. It had already allowed Chu Mu's strength to reach the peak of the 4th refinement. The main power of the Withering Secret Technique was to greatly increase one's strength at the cost of life force and lifespan. Everything else was supplementary. Therefore, the strength that Chu Mu could display now was not only at the peak of the 4th refinement. As long as he was willing, he could display even more strength. He could always maintain the peak of the 4th refinement. As such, the consumption of his lifespan was 10 times faster than usual. In other words, if Chu Mu could originally live for 100,000 years, then now, he could only live for 10,000 years. If he wanted to use more power, he would have to consume more of his lifespan. Since the secret technique had already been used, it could not be stopped. 10 times the consumption was the lowest. Beyond that, there were 100 times, 1,000 times, and the highest was 10,000 times. The strike that killed the Diablo's clone was the peak of the fourth refinement. The clone was only at the peak of the fourth refinement, so it was impossible for him to block it. Under normal circumstances, a cultivator at the peak of the ninth star saint realm can live for tens of thousands or even 100,000 years. As for me, when my life force was at the peak of the ninth star saint realm, it was already comparable to an ordinary first refinement peerless cultivator. With the wood aspect origin and the intermediate demonic spirit body, living for hundreds of thousands of years won't be a problem. With 10 times the consumption, I can still live for tens of thousands of years. If my cultivation continues to increase during this period of time and reaches a higher level, my lifespan will increase again. Chu Mu thought to himself, with 10 times the consumption, I can live for tens of thousands of years. With 100 times the consumption, I can live for thousands of years. With 1,000 times the consumption, I can live for hundreds of years. With 10 times the consumption, I can live for tens of years. If I want to kill the 9 kings of the imperial court, I can't do it with 10 times the consumption. At the very least, I need 100 times the consumption. Once the withering secret technique was activated, it could not be stopped or reversed. Now Chu Mu was at the first level, which was 10 times the consumption. If he entered the second level, which was 100 times the consumption, he would be stuck at 100 times the consumption. The difference between tens of thousands of years and thousands of years was too obvious. Chu Mu had to be careful. At the moment, his strength at the peak of the fourth refinement was enough to deal with many strong enemies. In the second prison, a figure appeared out of thin air. It was the Diablo. On his face, there was still a lingering fear. He didn't understand what had happened. Why didn't Chu Mu die after being hit by his full force palm? Instead, his strength increased tremendously, far surpassing his own. With a single sword strike, he killed his clone. If it wasn't for the fact that he had killed a prison beast and obtained the key to enter the second prison, his clone wouldn't have been able to escape. The two doppelgangers were closely related to each other, and they could sense each other's pain. Therefore, when the evil king's doppelganger died, he knew very well how painful it was. He also knew that the might of that sword was extremely powerful, surpassing the advanced fourth refinement. In other words, even if his two doppelgangers merged into one, they would not be able to withstand the might of that sword. I have to find the others and tell them about Chu Mu. We have to work together to eliminate him. The Diablo mumbled to himself. When one of his clones died, the other one would naturally become the new main body. His strength would also rapidly recover to the fourth refinement realm. This was the profoundness of his self-created Diablo illusory demon body. The Diablo also believed that with Chu Mu's strength, he would most likely be able to enter the second prison. Such an enemy made him feel fear and fear. He had to kill him to prevent future troubles. He swore to kill Chu Mu. At the same time, Chu Mu swore to kill the Diablo and the other 8 kings of the imperial dynasty. He would kill everyone in the imperial dynasty. Once the two of them met, there would only be a matter of life and death. Chapter 1980. In the deep blue first hell, 3 streaks of light flashed past like shooting stars in the dark sky. According to the life-chasing plate, Chu Mu is still in the first hell, and he's in this direction. The leader of the 3 figures held a milky white plate in his hand. It was the size of a palm, and there was a golden needle on it that pointed forward. They followed the golden needle and flew quickly. Not long after the Sky Race's Saint Venerate brought the Sky Race's experts away from the confrontation with the human race, He took out the life-chasing plate and gave it to a portion of the Sky Race's experts to find Chu Mu and kill him. These 3 Sky Race's experts were part of the group that chased after Chu Mu. Chu Mu didn't know about this. He, who was looking for the 9 kings of the imperial court, happened to fly in the direction of these 3 Sky Race's experts and met them. "You delivered yourself to me. Death awaits you." When the 3 Sky Race's experts saw Chu Mu, they immediately put away the life-chasing plate and laughed coldly with killing intent. At this moment, Chu Mu's aura had become obscure because of the withered secret technique. It was difficult to tell what level he was at. Therefore, the 3 Sky Race's experts didn't put him in their eyes. One had to know that these 3 Sky Race's experts had 1 early 4th refinement expert and 2 peak 3rd refinement expert. These 3 celestial race experts all stared at Chu Mu's forehead. Their eyes seemed to be filled with excitement. Chu Mu also felt a wave of coldness coming from his forehead. A mysterious silver rune floated out from there. "It really is the heavenly slaughter curse. You deserve to die. You killed over 100 experts of my clan in one go. I will tear you to pieces. You will completely disappear from this world." Seeing the silver rune on Chu Mu's forehead, the expressions of the 3 celestial race people abruptly changed. They were incomparably unsightly. Killing intent poured out like a volcanic eruption, shaking the void. "So this thing is the heavenly slaughter curse. What's its use?" Chu Mu asked casually. "Of course it's useful, and it's very useful. It will double the damage you receive from my clan's heaven martial arts." An expert from the heavenly race laughed sinisterly. As the sound of his voice faded, he stabbed out with a finger, causing a white beam of light to pierce through space, shooting towards Chu Mu. As soon as he attacked, the other 2 celestial race experts also attacked, showing no mercy. However, in Chu Mu's eyes, 2 at the peak of the 3rd refinement and 1 at the early stage of the 4th refinement were no threat at all. A single sword, just a single sword slashed out. The sword light tore through the air, resembling a crescent moon setting in the west, destroying the attacks of the 3 experts from the heavenly race. The sword light didn't weaken in the slightest as it continued on its way. The 3 experts from the heavenly race discovered that they had no way to evade this sword. It was too fast, exceeding the reaction speed of their consciousness and bodies. The sword light slashed through the bodies of the 3 celestial clan powerhouses and dissipated into the void. Chu Mu's left hand reached out, grabbing the head of the early stage 4th refinement celestial race expert. Using the Mara secret art, he began to search the memories in his soul. Mournful wails rang out. The celestial race expert's face twisted in pain, but he was unable to die. As for the other 2 celestial race experts, Chu Mu had controlled the sword light to destroy their consciousness, causing them to die. Under the Azure Wither secret art, Chu Mu's will had also been strengthened. His soul's endurance had also increased. 2 hours later, he released his hand. From the celestial race expert's soul, he had found some useful memories. The heavenly slaughter curse and life-chasing plate. The heavenly slaughter curse was a curse of the celestial race. If one killed over 100 celestial race experts in a short period of time, they would be struck by this curse. The use of this curse was to allow the celestial race experts to sense the existence of the target within a certain range, making it easier to hunt them down. Furthermore, the heavenly slaughter curse would cause the target to suffer double the damage when attacked by the celestial race's martial arts and spirit art. This kind of doubling was sometimes like the straw that broke the camel's back. However, in this world there was nothing truly perfect. The heavenly slaughter curse would also cause the target's killing power to increase by several times. It could be said that the heavenly slaughter curse was like a two-edged blade to the target and the celestial race. In this way, Chu Mu was at ease. Facing the celestial race, he would not be at a disadvantage. As for the fate-chasing plate, it was something that he was extremely interested in. The fate-chasing plate was one of the most important treasures of the celestial race. It could be said that it was one of the three most important treasures in the celestial race. It had always been stored in the clan and would never be taken out. The fate-chasing plate in the hands of the celestial race was actually not the main body, but a child body created from the main body. This was because the main body of the fate-chasing plate had suffered heavy injuries in its early years and had yet to recover. Every time it was used, not only would it consume a lot of energy, it would also worsen the injuries of the main body, causing the celestial race to not dare to use it. One of the abilities of the fate-chasing plate was to track. As long as it locked onto the other party's aura, or had seen the other party's appearance with its own eyes, it could send its aura or appearance into the fate-chasing plate. The fate-chasing plate's power would activate and search for the target. If it was the main body, the range of the tracking would be even larger. Basically, it could cover 1/10 of the deep blue world. Other than that, it also had other abilities. However, the child body only had the ability to track, which was only 1/10 of the main body. 10% of its power was actually very strong. The first prison of the deep blue 18 hells seemed to be vast, but it was far from being comparable to the deep blue world. At most, it was equivalent to the combination of several large regions. A child body of the fate-chasing plate was enough to cover the entire first prison. As long as the target was in the first prison, it would not be able to escape the pursuit of the fate-chasing plate. He was worried about how to find the 9 kings of the imperial court. After all, he couldn't spend all his time on searching for the 9 kings of the imperial court. If he missed the world spirit because of this, he would regret it. Having both was the best. The fate-chasing plate, to a certain extent, had solved his problem. Very quickly, Chu Mu obtained the fate-chasing disc and dispelled the imprint on it. He imprinted his mind imprint on it. I can still use it 9 more times, Chu Mu thought. He couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. The child body's fate-chasing plate had 1/10 of the main body's power. At the same time, there was a limit to the number of times it could be used. It could only be used 10 times. Now, he had already used it once. The Diablo has already entered the second prison. I don't need to waste another chance. Chu Mu thought. The Sage King is ranked first and is the strongest. He might have already entered the second prison. If that's the case, I'll start from the weakest one. Among the 10 kings of the imperial court, the weakest was the King Kong. The Battle King was already dead. Chu Mu had already seen the other 9 kings. Their appearances were clear in his mind. Chu Mu immediately used his consciousness to sketch out the King Kong's appearance in the fate-chasing plate. Soon, the outline was complete. It was as if the King Kong had appeared in the fate-chasing plate. Chu Mu felt his power pouring out of his body like a flood. It flowed along his arm and was absorbed by the fate-chasing plate. The golden needle on the fate-chasing plate also started to spin. After spinning a few times, the golden needle stopped and pointed in a direction. Chu Mu also received a vague message from the fate-chasing plate. It told him that the King Kong was still in the first prison and that the fate-chasing plate had locked onto him. 9 kings of the imperial court, I'll start with you. Chu Mu's eyes flashed. He quickly flew in the direction the fate-chasing plate was pointing in. The King Kong was moving because none of his Vajra celestial generals had reached the 3rd refinement. As kings of the imperial court, there was a competitive relationship between them. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the 9 kings would not move together. The King Kong was ranked 10th. Originally, he was not as strong as the Battle King. However, after decades of seclusion, he now had the strength of an advanced 3rd refinement. Moreover, his defensive power was extremely shocking. Unfortunately, in a place like this, the advanced 3rd refinement was not very strong. The King Kong was in a sorry state because he had just escaped from an extreme 3rd refinement hell beast. Fortunately, his defensive power was amazing. Otherwise, he would have been killed. Even so, he was heavily injured. However, he was a cultivator of the path of saintly body. He had formed a spiritual body and his self-healing ability was amazing. His injuries healed quickly. Should I leave? The King Kong thought to himself. He already knew that with his strength, it would be difficult for him to move around here unless he followed the other kings. However, he had his own dignity and pride. While he was thinking, a sword light quickly approached him. In the blink of an eye, it appeared in front of the King Kong. "It's you." The King Kong looked and saw that it was Chu Mu. He was immediately excited. His eyes shone with excitement. "Yes, it's me." Chu Mu's voice was very cold. It was like a cold wind from the extreme north. It made the King Kong's body tremble. A chill rose from the depths of his heart. Although he couldn't see through Chu Mu's strength, the Vajra King didn't feel any fear. Instead, he took it seriously. After all, the Battle King had been killed. No matter if he was killed by Chu Mu alone or by them working together, it meant that Chu Mu wasn't weak. Chu Mu did not want to talk nonsense with the King Kong. He stabbed his sword. The sword pierced through the void. It was extremely fast. The King Kong was not good at speed and reaction. Therefore, he was not afraid. He was confident that with his King Kong body, he could withstand Chu Mu's sword. Then, he would use his fists to smash Chu Mu's body. In the next breath, the King Kong knew that he was wrong. Very wrong. Chu Mu's sword directly broke through his amazing defense. His King Kong body, which was able to withstand the attack of the peak of the third refining, was as fragile as tofu under Chu Mu's sword. The sword pierced through the space between his eyebrows and came out from the back of his head. The terrifying power crushed the King Kong's consciousness, leaving only his primordial spirit. Before the King Kong had time to think, his eyes quickly dimmed. His whole body swayed and was about to fall to the ground. The sword was pulled out. The King Kong's body fell to the ground, splashing a cloud of dust. Chapter 1981. Night of 100 Ghosts. The Ghost King's ultimate technique caused 100 pitch-black ghost shadows to rapidly charge out of its body. Mournful cries rang out incessantly as its sharp claws tore through the air. Its body shuttled through the void as it attacked Chu Mu. These ghosts could travel between reality and illusion. They could enter a person's body and affect their soul, causing damage to their spiritual world. However, although the Ghost King's ultimate skill was strange, his strength was far from Chu Mu's. The difference between the peak of the third refinement and the peak of the fourth refinement was indescribable. With a glare, an incomparably tyrannical mental will accompanied by sword intent shot out. Under Chu Mu's gaze, the 100 ghost figures were directly torn apart. Miserable cries rang out unceasingly as they all turned into nothingness. The Ghost King's hair stood on end as the sword pierced through the sky. The Ghost King unleashed all of his ghostly energy. 10,000 ghosts devour the heavens. With a loud roar, the Ghost King's body exploded. Endless darkness spread out. The ferocious ghosts covered the sky as if they wanted to devour the heavens. Chu Mu's vision was completely blocked. He couldn't even see his own fingers. Even the power of his soul was seriously affected. Countless illusions appeared. It was as if he was in hell. Evil ghosts were everywhere. They reached out their claws and bit at him as if they wanted to tear him apart. His incomparably tyrannical mental willpower let Chu Mu know that all of this was an illusion. However, if he believed it, he would fall into the illusion, and the illusion would become real. The sword will filled the air, and all the illusions were destroyed. The ferocious ghosts all revealed terrified expressions. They melted like snow under the scorching sun and turned into nothingness. The sky was clear and the earth was clear. A sword pierced through the stars. The Ghost King's body reformed. He looked down at his chest. There was a fist-sized hole. A terrifying power spread out from the wound and covered his entire body. Chu Mu, you will die too. The mournful voice was like the roar of hell. It was full of curses. It cursed Chu Mu to die and fall into hell forever. You can't see it. Chu Mu's tone was very cold. Zhang Xian sheathed the sword, and the Ghost King's body exploded. Even his primordial spirit dissipated, and the curse that he had yet to complete came to an end. With a flick of his sword, the Ghost King's spatial ring fell into his hand. The Vajra King, the Azure King, the Ghost King, and the War King are all dead. There are only 6 kings left. Chu-Mu thought to himself. Out of the 10 kings of the imperial dynasty, 4 had died to his sword. However, they were the last 4 kings. The Vajra King specialized in defense, but it was a pity that the difference in strength between him and Chu-Mu was too great. The Azure King was a heaven-sent genius. He used the immortal deity art of the undying Saint Emperor as a reference and created his own evergreen divine art. As long as he wasn't completely destroyed, he could use the evergreen divine art to revive himself. If the Azure King was given enough time, he would definitely become a Saint Venerable. If it was the ancient era, he would definitely become a Saint Emperor. Unfortunately, such a heaven-sent genius also died under Chu-Mu's sword. Because the difference in strength was too great, he was completely annihilated. There was no luck. The Ghost King specialized in the Ghost Dao and used his body to devour ghosts. He was extremely terrifying and was an extremely difficult opponent. He was almost invincible among those of the same level. Taking out the fate-chasing disc, Chu-Mu used his mind to outline the image of the Blood King. However, after the image was formed, it dissipated. This meant that the Blood King was no longer in the first prison. Next, the 5th-ranked Dragon King was also no longer in the first prison. The 4th-ranked Evil King had already entered the second prison. There was no need to search for him. The top 3 Saint Kings, the Sword of Gojoseon and the Martial King should have entered the second prison as well. Chu-Mu thought, even if they haven't entered yet, they will definitely enter. So, I'll enter the second prison first. A fate-chasing disc could only be used 10 times. Previously, when the Celestials chased after him, he used it once. Chu-Mu used it 3 times to kill the Vajra King, the Green King, and the Ghost King. It was the 4th time to chase after the Blood King. So, there were 5 chances left. Making a prompt decision, he communicated with the light in his spiritual world. Chu-Mu immediately felt the light explode and rush out of his spiritual world. It wrapped around his body at a speed faster than he could react. Then, it was driven by an irresistible force through time and space. It was difficult to distinguish north, south, east, and west. This feeling only lasted for an instant before disappearing. Chu-Mu appeared in the second prison. The Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi in the second prison was clearly denser and purer than in the first prison. It was at least twice as dense. However, the sky was also dark. A loud rumbling sound came from afar and the ground trembled. Chu-Mu looked into the distance. In the distance, a volcano was spewing magma recklessly. Red light spread out, illuminating a corner of the sky. A blazing aura also spread out. The second prison was also known as the volcanic prison. Volcanoes were everywhere, and magma could erupt at any time. It was dangerous. I wonder how I can enter the third prison from the second prison? Chu-Mu thought to himself. He took out the fate-chasing disc and entered the image of the Evil King. This time, the needle on the fate-chasing disc started to move. From the looks of it, the Evil King was still in the second prison. Since the fate-chasing disc had locked onto his location, Chu-Mu immediately moved. The Blood King was the 6th of the 10 kings of the imperial court. Originally, his cultivation was higher than the War King's. After going into seclusion, he broke through to the 4th refinement, becoming a peak early-stage 4th refinement expert. However, only 2 of his celestial generals had reached the 3rd refinement. The strength of a peak early-stage 4th refinement expert was already quite powerful. He easily killed the Hell Beast at the peak of the 3rd refinement in the first prison and obtained the qualifications to enter the second prison. Furthermore, he was quite lucky. The 2 celestial generals under him also obtained the qualifications to enter the second prison. However, they were unlucky. As soon as they entered, they happened to be at the mouth of a volcano. The Blood King and the remaining celestial generals had been in the second prison for a few days. They gradually found some clues as to how to enter the third prison. Now, he wanted to try and see if his guess was true. Perhaps it was fated that he would die under Chu Mu's sword. Therefore, the direction Blood King was advancing in just happened to be opposite of Chu Mu's. Then, they coincidentally met. Meeting the Blood King was an accident. When he met Chu Mu, the Blood King was first stunned. Then, a smile appeared on his handsome face. It was a smile of someone who had searched high and low for something only to find it by chance. "There's no door to hell, but you barged in. I'll send you on your way." The Blood King did not hesitate at all. He struck out with his palm. The blood-colored palm instantly expanded like a huge blood-colored millstone that suppressed the world. Blood handprint. It was one of the Undying Saint Emperor's 10 ultimate techniques. Its power was not inferior to the heavenly evil palm. However, the Blood King's cultivation was far inferior to Diablo's. Compared to Chu Mu, the difference was even greater. He slashed out with his sword, slicing apart the huge blood handprint and tearing the void apart. The killing intent on the Blood King's face turned into fear. Unable to dodge, the sword light turned slightly and killed Diablo's celestial general. He reached out with his left hand and grabbed the Blood King's head, using the Mara Mystic technique to search his soul. Every time the Mara Mystic technique was used, it needed a period of time before it could be used again. This way, it would not cause damage to one's soul. The interval was closely related to the strength of one's soul and will. In the first prison, when Chu Mu killed King Vajra, King Qing, and Ghost King, he did not use the Mara Mystic technique. It was not that he did not want to use it, but that he could not. But now, the interval had passed and he could use it again. He was not interested in the Blood King's memories, so he directly ignored them and skimmed through them. Suddenly, Chu Mu stopped because he found that the most recent memories were related to the second and third prisons. In the Blood King's memories, Chu Mu had only intercepted the method to enter the third prison from the second prison. Therefore, the burden was not that great. The Blood King's method was just a guess. Whether it was true or not, he had to try it himself to prove it. Since the Blood King was dead, Chu Mu knew of this method and would naturally try it himself. However, according to the World Spirit's words on the World Monument, the corresponding Deep Blue God Pearl could be used in the corresponding Deep Blue 18 Purgatories. Chu Mu took out a Deep Blue God Pearl with 3 stars on it. It was a 3-star God Pearl. He tried to communicate with it, but realized that he could not enter the third purgatory. Could it be that I can only use the 3-star Divine Pearl in the third prison and enter the fourth prison directly? Chu Mu guessed. If it was true, then the qualification to enter the first prison was to leave a mark on the world's steel. And the person who entered the second prison from the first prison must have used a 1-star Divine Pearl. Another question arose. What if the Divine Pearl was on someone who did not enter the Deep Blue 18 prisons? Chu Mu was puzzled. He had no way to investigate, so he could only try using the Blood King's method. Not far away, there was a volcano that had yet to erupt. Chu Mu quickly came to the volcano's crater and looked inside. With his current strength, even if the volcano erupted, it would not kill him. At most, he would be in a sorry state. The Blood King guessed that the way to enter the third prison was to enter the volcano and obtain an item. But as for what it was, he would only know after entering the volcano. Without any hesitation, Chu Mu entered the volcano's crater. Below him was boiling magma that constantly bubbled. When the bubbles burst, an extremely high temperature was emitted. Following that, there was a strong smell of sulfur that was very pungent. His spiritual power spread out and entered the magma. He carefully searched to see if there was anything that could catch his attention. After all, the Blood King was only guessing and had not confirmed it. The blazing heat constantly spread out. Chu Mu felt like he was being roasted over a fire. If not for his great improvement in strength, he would not have been able to withstand it. An hour later, Chu Mu's eyes lit up as he discovered something. He grabbed at the magma with his left hand and immediately grabbed a spot of light. The light appeared and directly entered Chu Mu's spiritual world. It was the key to enter the third prison. Chapter 1982. After obtaining the key to enter the third hell and completing one of his goals, Chu Mu heaved a sigh of relief. Now, he could focus on finding the other kings of the Imperial Dynasty. Currently, the Imperial Dynasty only had Saint King, Sword of Gojoseon, Martial King, Diabolical King, and Dragon King left. They were the 5 strongest out of the 10 kings. With the life-chasing disc in hand, Chu Mu looked at where the golden needle was pointing. It was where Diabolical King was. If one had to say who he wanted to kill the most out of the 10 kings, it would be Diabolical King. He sped up and turned into a sword of light. He charged out of the volcano and headed towards Diabolical King. Diabolical King's 3 generals were all dead and his strength was still at the peak of the middle stage of the 4th refinement. After all, it had only been a few days and it wasn't enough for him to recover to the high stage of the 4th refinement. Diabolical King, who was searching for a way to enter the third hell, suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. This was a sense of danger that was directly related to him. Did Chu Mu enter the second hell too? The evil king thought back and forth. The only thing that could make his heart palpitate like this was probably Chu Mu, who was a powerful enemy. Diabolical King wasn't surprised that Chu Mu had entered the second hell. No, I have to meet up with the other kings, Diabolical King thought. He made a decision and took out his royal token. Every king had an imperial medallion. The imperial medallion not only gave them the right to mobilize the undead royal guards once, but also allowed them to communicate with the other kings' swords. However, the 10 kings all competed with each other, and they all had their own pride. Although their strength was different, their dignity wasn't any weaker. If there wasn't anything special, they wouldn't look for each other. And now, the heretic king had taken the initiative to contact the other kings because of Chu Mu. Just thinking about it made him feel vexed. This made him feel inferior to the others, and it didn't feel good. After taking out the royal token, Evil King had an idea. Starting from King Kong, who ranked the lowest, he sent messages to Blood King, but no one responded. This was very unusual. He frowned and felt uneasy. Without hesitation, he sent a message to King Saint, who ranked first. Then, he sent messages to Sword of Gojoseon, King Wu, and Dragon King. Very soon, the Evil King received a reply from the Holy King, asking him to meet up at the center of the volcano. From the looks of it, Blood King and the others have followed in Warlord's footsteps. Saint King and his celestial generals quickly approached a gigantic volcano and put away the medallion. His celestial generals were astonished. Lord Sacred King, did the Blood King and the others also die under Chu Mu's sword? Asked the first Sacred King Heavenly General. It's possible, Saint King said casually as he waited for the Evil King and the other kings to arrive. You should know about Evil King's illusion demon body. One of his clones was killed by Chu Mu in one strike. What? The 12 heavenly generals were all shocked. They had a general understanding of the Evil King's strength. They also knew of the illusory devil body's mysteries. Yet, Chu Mu was able to kill a doppelganger in one strike. This was practically impossible. Sword of Gojoseon led the 10 celestial generals and changed directions, heading toward the volcano in the center. King Wu and Dragon King did the same. This was the first time the 9 kings of the imperial court met up after they split up in the first prison. Because of Chu Mu, they felt ashamed and embarrassed. However, now that things had developed to this point, they had no choice but to do so. If Chu Mu really had the strength to kill Evil King's clone with one strike, then he was definitely stronger than 4th refinement. They had to take him seriously. The direction changed? The golden needle on the fate-chasing disc moved, indicating that Evil King had changed his direction. But with the fate-chasing disc, unless he entered the third prison, he wouldn't be able to escape. At the foot of the volcano, Sword of Gojoseon, King Wu, Evil King, and Dragon King had all gathered. Blood King and the others might have already been killed, said Evil King. Until now, they hadn't responded. Tell me what happened, said Saint King. His tone was casual, but there was a hint of command. Evil King was furious, but he didn't refute. Instead, he told them what happened in detail. Everyone listened attentively. The main point should be Chu Mu's change. His black hair turned white. It's very likely that he used some secret technique at the cost of his lifespan, said King Wu. His guess was close to the truth. After hearing this, the others agreed with King Wu's deduction. In the face of absolute loss, everything is illusory. Saint King smiled coldly. Any secret technique has a limit on the increase of strength. This kind of secret technique that consumes one's lifespan has even greater side effects, added Dragon King. Your mind is in a mess. Sword of Gojoseon glanced at Evil King coldly. His tone was as sharp as a sword, causing Evil King's expression to change drastically. He almost exploded. Indeed, he was frightened at that time. What about now? Stay here? Evil King suppressed his anger and said coldly. We'll split up. The few of you will go together, said Saint King. Without waiting for the others to respond, he quickly left with his 12 heavenly generals. Chu Mu could kill Evil King's clone, who was at the peak of the middle level of the fourth refinement. His strength was at least at the peak of the fourth refinement. Even with the help of a secret technique, it was still very terrifying. Moreover, they didn't know where the limitations of that secret technique were. And the strength of the peak of the fourth refinement was enough to threaten them, except for the most mysterious Saint King. A mere Chu Mu, I can kill him with a single sword. Sword of Gojoseon was extremely arrogant. He also left with his heavenly generals. He didn't listen to Saint King's words at all. If it wasn't for the fact that the timing wasn't right, he would have challenged Saint King and become the first of the 10 kings. You can follow me, Martial King said to Evil King. Evil King's anger was like a volcano, but he suppressed it and didn't explode. The Dragon King furrowed his brows, but he didn't have any intentions of leaving. His strength was at the peak of the fourth refinement initial stage. The difference between him and the Evil King was very clear. If Chu Mu could still use that secret technique, it would be extremely dangerous if they encountered each other. Moving together with the Martial King was the best option. As for Saint King and Sword of Gojoseon, their strength had already reached a level where they could only look up to them. But as for how strong they were, only they knew. Moreover, based on their temperament, they would definitely not join forces with them. He's here. Suddenly, Evil King opened his mouth. He had always been extremely sensitive to danger. The Martial King and the Dragon King knew this as well. Therefore, they immediately reacted and looked in the direction of the Evil King's gaze. With their eyesight, they could easily see the scene hundreds of thousands of meters away, as long as it wasn't blocked. A moment later, a silhouette appeared in their line of sight. 100,000 meters wasn't considered long for a cultivator of the fourth refinement. That silhouette quickly became clear in the eyes of the crowd. When they saw Chu Mu also saw them. Very good, we saved 2 chances of using the fate-chasing disc. Chu Mu's eyes flickered. This was his thought. As for the Martial King, Evil King, Dragon King, and a few heavenly generals teaming up, he didn't feel any fear. This was the confidence that came from strength, a type of confidence. Seeing that we are here, you still dare to come over. You are indeed extremely arrogant. Dragon King's face was filled with a cold smile. Shortly after, the aura around his body trembled. Vaguely, there seemed to be a powerful dragon roar coming from his body. Immediately, a ray of light appeared from Dragon King's body and quickly circled around his body. In the end, it turned into a set of armor. A set of armor that looked like a dragon. Dragon King shook his body and transformed into a dragon man. Dragon King treasure armor. This was a secret treasure that the Dragon King had once obtained from a fortuitous encounter. It originated from the ancient times, and a Jiao dragon's soul had been refined into it. After the Dragon King treasure armor was refined, once it was activated, it would cover one's entire body and transform into a metal dragon man, possessing terrifying strength, speed, and defense. It was as if a human had transformed into a monster. Dragon King's strength was only at the peak of the 4th refinement realm. However, after using the Dragon King treasure armor, he reached the advanced 4th refinement realm. This didn't even include the secret technique. Without any hesitation, Evil King used all of his strength. The aura of the peak of the 4th refinement realm filled the air. Shortly after, he used another secret technique. Evil Chi soared into the sky and his aura rose to the advanced 4th refinement realm. Facing Chu Mu, he recalled the scene where he was killed by a sword and felt his heart palpitate for no reason. Martial King's face turned serious. He clenched his hands and a set of armor appeared on his arms. It quickly spread to his palms. The armor looked extremely domineering. The aura of the peak of the 4th refinement realm filled the air and filled the air. Martial King, Dragon King, and Heavenly Generals all released their auras to their limit. Their auras soared into the sky and stirred up the clouds. It was like a volcano erupting. Hidden dragon rises from the abyss. Dragon King clenched his fist and retracted it. Then, he instantly punched out. A dragon's roar resounded. The terrifying fist energy condensed into a dragon that was over 100 feet long. It rushed into the sky as if it had rushed out of the abyss. It carried an unparalleled might and a spirit that could shatter the heavens as it rushed towards Chu Mu. Heavenly Evil Palm. Evil King also used all of his strength. He punched out with his palm and it seemed like the sky was about to be pierced through. Invincible Finger. Destruction of the heavens. Martial King's arm shook and a terrifying energy surged. He pointed out with his finger. His destruction of the heavens was many times stronger than Zhan Wang's destruction of the heavens. There was no comparison at all. In the Imperial Dynasty, apart from Holy King who was the Undying Saint Emperor's disciple, the other 9 kings all inherited the Undying Saint Emperor's secret techniques. This kind of inheritance was directly passed down from the Undying Saint Emperor. However, it didn't mean that they only knew one secret technique. Martial King had astonishing talent on the path of cultivation. He had used some methods to obtain the invincible finger from Zhan Wang and had successfully mastered it. His level of attainment was even higher than Zhan Wang's. Chapter 1983. The Flood Dragon came out of the abyss and soared into the sky. The Heavenly Evil Palm shattered the firmament and the Heavenly Collapse Finger shattered the void. King Wu, and King Long also made their moves and executed their strongest attack. Various colored lights tore through the sky and blasted towards Chu Mu. The tyrannical power caused Chu Mu's expression to change slightly. Under the first layer of the Azure Wither secret technique, his strength had reached the peak of the 4th refinement, which was equivalent to the current King Wu. King Wu's finger had brought him a certain degree of threat, but Chu Mu did not care about the other attacks. With the Heavenly Collapse Finger, King Wu launched other attacks. King Wu was known as the King of the Martial Dao. He had extraordinary talent in the Martial Dao. As long as he saw the Martial Dao once, he would learn it. Even if he did not learn it, he would be able to see some of its mysteries and come up with a better response. He was proficient in the finger, palm, and fist. After King Wu threw out 3 tyrannical attacks, his figure soared into the sky and instantly closed in on Chu Mu. Chu Mu shattered King Wu's 3 consecutive attacks with his sword, ignoring the others' attacks. In an instant, King Wu appeared before Chu Mu and launched an extremely violent attack. His arms, legs, and body, every part of his body had turned into a lethal weapon. The combination was perfect, flowing like water. It was like a waterfall that was 10,000 feet high, pouring down in torrents with an incomparable impact. In terms of close-range combat, Emperor Wu fully utilized his advantage and displayed everything he had learned. Fist techniques, palm techniques, finger techniques, palm techniques, elbows, shoulders, knees, feet, etc. King Wu fully utilized every part of his body. It was Chu Mu's first time encountering such an opponent. In an instant, he was suppressed by King Wu and was at a disadvantage. However, Chu Mu's absolute strength was not inferior to King Wu's. His combat awareness and talent were also very good. He instantly adjusted himself and fought against King Wu with both offense and defense. Mountain slashing slash. The palm was like a giant axe, and a single swing of the axe could split mountains and shatter the heavens. The finger was like a sword, and it could pierce through the heavens, overturn rivers and seas, shatter mountains and shatter the earth, destroy the moon and sink the stars. Once King Wu launched his attack, the evil king, the dragon king, and the other heavenly generals had no room to intervene. In their eyes, King Wu's figure directly surrounded Chu Mu, attacking from all directions without any blind spots. They could only hope that King Wu could kill Chu Mu. Since they were both at the peak of the fourth refinement, the only way to determine the victor was through battle techniques, the application of power, the grasp of timing, the control of rhythm, and other aspects. King Wu was outstanding in these aspects, but Chu Mu was even more outstanding. With two swords in hand, after turning the tables around, Chu Mu struck out with his own rhythm, contending against the martial king. Gradually, under imperceptible influence, he gained a slight advantage. This was an irreversible process. No matter how the martial king exerted strength, he was unable to reverse his gradually increasing disadvantage. To King Wu, this was an impossible situation. It was the first time in his life that something like this had ever happened. Among the 10 kings, he was not the strongest, but his combat ability was the strongest. If they were at the same level of strength, King Wu was confident that even a saint king would not be a match for him. But now, even though they were at the same level of strength, Chu Mu had not only turned the tables on him, but he was also gradually being suppressed. He was at a disadvantage, and was unable to reverse the situation. The truth was the truth. King Wu had to accept it even if he did not want to. Using the secret technique, his aura skyrocketed. King Wu's strength instantly reached the peak of the fourth refinement. Since he was unable to suppress Chu Mu in the aspect that he was good at, then he would use absolute strength and his combat talent to suppress Chu Mu and kill him. The difference between the peak of the fourth refinement and the peak of the fourth refinement was very obvious. The advantage that Chu Mu had just gained was instantly broken, and the two sides were equal. King Wu's combat ability was an eye-opener for Chu Mu. This was the first time he had encountered such an opponent. It would be a very good experience, a kind of training. The same move twice is useless against me. This was what King Wu knew, and he had achieved it. But facing Chu Mu, the same sword had thousands of variations, making King Wu unable to judge. Not to mention the second sword, even if it was the third or fourth sword, King Wu would still have to use all his strength to deal with it. The battle between Chu Mu and King Wu did not seem to be as grand as the one that would cause the sky to collapse and the earth to rend. However, both of them were very clear that when the other party's strength was concentrated, it did not seem strong, but it was actually very terrifying. It was much more dangerous than a scene that caused the sky to collapse and the earth to rend. King Wu's eyes burned with fire, and he unconsciously clenched his fists. In the depths of his eyes, there was a flash of fear that even he himself did not notice. Unexpectedly, Chu Mu could actually fight King Wu, who had used the secret technique to such an extent. This kind of strength was completely above his. No wonder that sword could instantly kill one of his doppelgangers. As for Chu Mu, could it be that he could maintain this kind of strength forever? For no reason, a trace of fear emerged from the depths of King Wu's heart. It spread out like a virus. King Wu's eyes were cold, and the aura that his body emitted was like a cold metal man. He raised his head and stared at the sky. With his strength, he could only vaguely see the movements of Chu Mu and King Wu. It was very vague, and this made him feel incomparably fearful. He was glad that he did not act alone. "All right, the battle ends here," Chu Mu suddenly said. With his current strength, it was very difficult to kill King Wu, who was at the limit of the fourth refinement. One had to know that King Wu was not an ordinary person at the limit of the fourth refinement, but a person who had astonishing battle awareness and talent. His strength had reached more than 100%, and he was definitely a monster who could fight above his level. The difference between the limit of the fourth refinement and the peak of the fourth refinement was very obvious. It was already very rare for Chu Mu to be able to maintain a stalemate without falling into a disadvantageous position. Even if he used the most tyrannical heavenly slaughter earthly calamity sword style, the power that erupted was only at the limit of the fourth refinement. It might be more tyrannical than King Wu's current strength, but it was definitely not to the extent where it could suppress him. When facing an expert like King Wu, without absolute suppression, there was no way to kill him. Now, except for the withering secret technique, Chu Mu's other secret techniques had been integrated and could not be used again. In other words, those secret techniques had always been in a state of being used. Withering, the second stage, the moment his voice fell, without any hesitation, he directly activated the withering secret technique, which consumed 100 times more energy. In an instant, Chu Mu felt as if something was disappearing from the depths of his body. The feeling grew stronger and stronger, and his entire body seemed to be in a state of weakness. However, there was also a terrifying power surging from the depths of his body, like a surging tide, rushing to his limbs and bones. The powerful power almost made Chu Mu lose himself. As the second stage of the withering secret technique was executed, Chu Mu's white hair fluttered in the wind, like a demon god. The terrifying aura rapidly rose from the peak of the fourth refinement. Soon, it reached the limit of the fourth refinement, but it did not stop there. It rose again, and only stopped when it was infinitely close to the fifth refinement. Such an aura made King Wu, who was close by, feel incomparably oppressed. Without any hesitation, King Wu quickly retreated, taking a step back. In an instant, he was 1,000 meters away, as if he was at the end of the world. Chu Mu did not understand what was going on with the sudden increase in strength, but he instinctively felt that something was wrong. The warning of death made his entire body turn cold, and his hair stand on end. "Run, run, run, I have to leave as soon as possible. The farther, the faster, the better. Otherwise, I will most likely die here." However, Chu Mu, who had used the second stage of the withering secret technique, which increased the consumption of his lifespan by 100 times, wanted to kill King Wu. How could he let him escape? Without any pretense, Chu Mu slashed out with his sword. The sword light instantly disappeared into the void. King Wu, who had already escaped tens of thousands of meters away, suddenly trembled and stopped in midair. Soon after, his powerful aura started to weaken, and he could no longer maintain his position in the air. He fell heavily to the ground, and his powerful body directly smashed a huge hole in the ground. Blood spread out, dyeing the deep hole red. One sword was enough to decide life and death. Even King Wu's primordial spirit could not escape and fell directly. All of this happened too quickly. The evil king, Dragon King, and the other heavenly generals did not even have time to react. By the time they reacted, it was already over. King Wu was dead. In front of them, a sword light seemed to extend from the distant horizon. It was as slow as the tide, but also as fast as the aurora. It was incomparably fast. The coexistence of speed and slowness made the evil king, Dragon King, and the others feel very uncomfortable. A strong sense of dizziness seriously interfered with their thoughts and reactions. This sword was slashed out by Chu Mu, and he did not hold back. With the absolute difference in strength, the evil king, dragon king, and the other heavenly generals had no chance to dodge at all. After the sword slashed out, the sword light disappeared, as if it was an illusion. The evil king and the others stood on the spot in a daze. Then, their chests were cut clean and smooth. The terrifying sword intent shattered their consciousness. Chu-Mu reached out and grabbed the interspatial rings of the evil king, Dragon King, King Wu, and the others. He checked them carefully and found that there was nothing suitable for him. He casually kept them and took out the fate-chasing disc. The evil king is dead. I have taken revenge. Brothers, please leave. Chu-Mu looked up at the sky and said softly as if he was bidding farewell. Then, killing intent flashed in his eyes. However, there are still 2 kings out of the 10 kings of the imperial dynasty. Next, I will go and kill them and completely destroy the imperial dynasty. He directly entered the image of the sword of Gojoseon into the fate-chasing disc. The image appeared and it was very lifelike. The golden needle on the fate-chasing disc also started to spin. After a few breaths of time, it pointed in a direction. That was the direction where the sword of Gojoseon was. Without hesitation, Chu-Mu moved, turning into a sword light. His speed was much faster than before. The proud and aloof sword of Gojoseon and the mysterious Saint King were the last 2 kings of the imperial dynasty. They were also the 2 strongest of the 10 kings. King Wu was already at the peak of the 4th refinement. Then, the sword of Gojoseon's strength would definitely be even stronger. They were both sword cultivators. Chu-Mu's blood seemed to be boiling. Chapter 1984. Above a volcano in the second prison, the 2 sides were facing each other. One side had 1 person, while the other side had 12 people. Shocking sword chi soared into the sky with incomparable sharpness. It seems like you have a tracking treasure, the sword of Gojoseon said unhurriedly. His voice was indifferent, but it contained sharpness like a sharp sword. Every word was like a sword stabbing out, attacking one's mind. Those whose mind wasn't strong enough would feel weak and fearful under his words. Chu-Mu only felt that although the sword of Gojoseon's words sounded calm, they were incomparably sharp, like a sharp sword stabbing towards him. However, his will was incomparably strong, and his mind was strong enough to not be affected in the slightest. The sword of Gojoseon's reputation is well-deserved, Chu-Mu said sincerely. Even though they were enemies, even though he was on the must-kill list, he couldn't deny his attainment in Sword Dao. It had already been ingrained into his bones, and it had become an instinct. Every word and action of his was an interpretation of Sword Dao. You have also exceeded my expectations, the sword of Gojoseon said bluntly. This was the truth. In the past, he had never heard of Chu-Mu's name. Even when he knew that Chu-Mu had killed the Battle King, he didn't really take Chu-Mu seriously. Until now, when Chu-Mu stood in front of him, his aura wasn't inferior at all. The sharpness he emitted wasn't any weaker than his own. This was a peerless sword cultivator. The sword of Gojoseon's evaluation of Chu-Mu was the same, and so was Chu-Mu's evaluation of the sword of Gojoseon. In an instant, a trace of appreciation for each other appeared in their hearts. This was the appreciation between peerless sword cultivators. Traces of killing intent spread out from the bottom of their hearts. This killing intent was pure. It wasn't for revenge, jealousy, or righteousness. It was the killing intent of 2 peerless sword cultivators who had met their match. This battle was to kill the opponent and sharpen their own sword Dao. Their sword intent was roaring. The sword of Gojoseon emitted an aura that could destroy the world and all living things. The sword will of the sword of Gojoseon permeated the air. The heavens fell silent, the earth dried up, and all living things were destroyed. This was the sword of Gojoseon's sword intent, extermination sword intent. The extermination sword will could exterminate the heavens, the earth, and all living things. There was nothing between heaven and earth that could not be exterminated. The 11 celestial generals of the sword of Gojoseon were all peerless cultivators of the third refinement. Moreover, they were all sword cultivators. The aura they exuded was very shocking. They were like 11 treasured swords. However, they did not charge forward. Instead, they retreated far away, leaving the battlefield to the sword of Gojoseon and Chu Mu. This was a duel between sword cultivators, and no third party was allowed to interfere. Although there was no wind, the robes of Chu Mu and the sword of Gojoseon fluttered. Their white hair, which was as white as snow, fluttered. There seemed to be a touch of scarlet at the end of their black hair. With both swords in hand, the eternal sword intent and the extermination sword intent emanated from their bodies. The space around Chu Mu became strange. Half of it was as if it had never changed. No matter how much time passed, it would never be destroyed. The other half of it was as if everything in the world had been destroyed and turned into nothingness. 2 types of sword intent. The sword of Gojoseon's expression changed slightly. There was a flash of shock in his eyes. Since ancient times, there were very few people who had 2 types of sword intent. Moreover, most of them were relatively ordinary. For someone like Chu Mu, who had 2 types of sword intent, and both of them were of such a high level, was completely out of his expectations. It could be said that no one had ever done it before. The sword of Gojoseon could clearly feel that the 2 types of sword intent that Chu Mu released were not inferior to his extermination sword intent at all. In fact, they were even superior. His extermination sword intent was condensed from the Great Extermination Sword Codex, which was ranked second among the Undying Saint Emperor's 10 unique skills. It was an extremely high-level sword intent. As far as he knew, there was no sword intent that could surpass his extermination sword intent. At most, it was on the same level as the extermination sword intent, such as the extermination sword intent. There were similarities between the extermination sword intent and the extermination sword intent, but there were also obvious differences. The extermination sword intent focused more on destruction, complete destruction, while the extermination sword intent focused more on the destruction of life. If one were to use an analogy to describe it, the extermination sword intent focused more on brute force, while the extermination sword intent focused more on technique. Now, the extermination sword intent that he felt from Chu Mu's body was the ultimate destruction of destruction. It had already exceeded the scope of his knowledge. The sword of Gojoseon felt a surge of excitement for no reason. He had not felt this way for many years. It was just like when he was still young. He was very clear about the origin of this excitement and excitement. Moreover, he might also be able to master this kind of sword intent, which could strengthen his sword intent and increase his strength further. Grasping the void, a long and narrow black spiritual sword appeared in the sword of Gojoseon's right hand. The terrifying extermination sword intent instantly increased tenfold. Its power was endless, and it could destroy the heavens and the earth. The powerful extermination sword intent swept out in all directions, sweeping through the 4 extremes of the world. Like a sword, it slashed towards Chu Mu. The eternal sword intent circled around and collided with the extermination sword intent. They were evenly matched. As soon as they came into contact, Chu Mu and the sword of Gojoseon understood each other. In terms of the level of sword intent, Chu Mu's eternal sword intent and extermination sword intent were of a higher level than the sword of Gojoseon's extermination sword intent. However, in terms of the mastery of sword intent, the sword of Gojoseon was much better than Chu Mu. Chu Mu had only cultivated for a little more than 100 years, while the sword of Gojoseon had cultivated for 10,000 years. The difference in the amount of time that the two had spent in sword principle was 100 times. Moreover, the sword of Gojoseon's talent was also at the level of an eternal genius. His attainments in sword principle were unimaginable. Even though Chu Mu's talent was better than the sword of Gojoseon's, the difference of 100 times was not so easy to make up for. Therefore, no one had the upper hand in the confrontation of sword intent. The confrontation of sword intent was just a test. With the sword of Gojosian in hand, the sword of Gojosian drew his sword. His sword seemed to have crossed time and space, and in an instant, it pierced towards Chu Mu. The pitch-black sword tip appeared in front of Chu Mu's eyes in less than a breath, and pierced towards his forehead at an extremely fast speed. The two swords crossed, and the cross-sword light split the void. It was an attack against an attack. Both sides did not directly use powerful sword moves. Instead, they used basic sword techniques to fight. When they realized this, a trace of astonishment flashed through their hearts. In the eyes of many people, the basic sword technique did not have any power at all. This was because it was just a basic technique. It was a technique that only beginners would cultivate to build their foundation. However, anyone who had some achievements in the way of the sword would cultivate a more powerful sword technique. When used in battle, the lethality of the sword technique would be even greater. However, only those who truly had profound attainments in sword principle understood that they could not give up on basic sword technique. They had to persevere in practicing them. Moreover, except for one or a few sword techniques that they had left behind as unique techniques, they would usually use basic sword techniques in battle. This had always been Chu Mu's fighting style, and it was also the sword of Gojosian's fighting style. Basic sword techniques were nothing more than basic sword techniques such as stabbing, chopping, slashing, and so on. There was nothing special about them. However, different swordsmen would have different mastery and understanding of basic sword technique. The difference was the essence of it. In the world, there were no two leaves that were exactly the same. Even if they had the same shape, the veins on them would be different or there would be differences in color. This was especially true for peerless swordsmen like Chu Mu and the sword of Gojosian. They had immersed themselves in basic sword techniques for many years, and their attainments were indescribable. The same piercing, but each had its own mysteries. The sword of Gojosian's basic sword techniques carried a sense of extermination. On the other hand, Chu Mu's basic sword techniques were all-encompassing. There were many styles, and he could do as he pleased. The two figures crossed each other in the void. The swords were incomparably sharp. The void under the swords was cut open. It should be known that the spatial strength of the deep blue 18 levels of hell was much stronger than that of the deep blue world. The second level of hell was also stronger than the first level. Even if a peerless expert of the third refinement attacked with all his might, it would be difficult to break open the space of the second level of hell. However, Chu Mu and the sword of Gojosian's swords easily cut open the space of the second level of hell. That kind of power was extremely terrifying. In the distance, the 11 heaven generals of the sword of Gojosian were all watching intently without blinking. They were completely captivated and immersed in it. Below them was a huge volcano. Inside the volcano, magma was boiling and bubbling. After the magma burst, a strong and pungent smell of sulfur permeated the air. Hot steam rose up in spirals. As the saying went, once an expert made a move, one would know if he was skilled or not. Both of them had the strength of a half-step to the fifth refinement and were using basic sword technique. Chu Mu and the sword of Gojosian did not hold back. Every move was a sure kill. Their goal was to take each other's life. Although it was not a powerful ultimate move, if it hit, it would definitely cause serious injuries or even death. The battle between sword cultivators was always so dangerous and cruel. The slightest carelessness would result in death. The sword of Gojosian stabbed out with the annihilation spiritual sword. Silently, the spiritual sword seemed to pierce into the void and reappeared in an instant. As the sword tip vibrated at high speed, it was as if 100 flowers had bloomed. It made this stab even more mysterious. It enveloped every part of Chu Mu's body. However, its trajectory was clearly grasped by Chu Mu's heart sword as one. Without retreating or dodging, the eternal spiritual sword swept out. Under the sword screen, it completely blocked the sword of Gojosian's stab. The Annihilation's spiritual sword slashed down and annihilated the void. The power was highly restrained and completely condensed in the sword. It did not cause any obvious damage to the surroundings. The aftermath of the battle was completely confined to a radius of a few meters. This degree of control over one's own power could be said to be the pinnacle. Chu Mu realized that the sword of Gojosian's swordsmanship had surpassed the level of one with the sword. It had reached the level of one with the sword. Moreover, it was at the intermediate stage of one with the sword. It was almost on par with him. Ever since Chu Mu embarked on the path of the sword, he had encountered countless opponents. However, none of them had reached the level of one with the sword. The sword of Gojosian was the first. Moreover, it was not at the initial stage of one with the sword, but at the intermediate stage. Similarly, the sword of Gojosian had also realized this. Apart from the ancient flourishing age, this was the first time he had encountered an opponent whose swordsmanship was not inferior to his. Instead, it was superior to his. The feeling of meeting a worthy opponent grew stronger. The murderous intent in his heart grew purer. It was a murderous intent to prove the path of the sword.